Marvel, I inherited the Shadow Realm. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 126. This is the real love-hate relationship. Listening to Jarvis' invitation and looking at the open villa, Thor couldn't help but take a deep breath and suppress the tension in his heart. This kind of emotion rarely appears in him, but it really exists now. After all, he can't beat any of the two people in this villa. But even so, he didn't hesitate too much and stepped into the villa directly. In the living room, Tony looked at Thor, who came in with a flash of surprise on his face, and at the same time, a smile rose at the corner of his mouth. Rare guest, looking for Loki? Yeah. Thor nodded. Tony was not surprised. He and Thor didn't have much friendship. Even if he wanted to find him, Nick should come in person. Therefore, Thor came here to find Loki. If it was someone else, they might think that Thor and Loki were incompatible. But Tony knew that the relationship between the two was very complicated, and it was more appropriate to describe it as love and hate, so he didn't mean to stop it. Jarvis, tell Loki that someone is looking for him. Please ask him to come out. Okay, sir. Jarvis' voice sounded. Tony looked at Thor and gestured. Sit down. What do you want to drink? Coffee or red wine? Thor sat opposite Tony. Facing Tony's greeting, he seemed a little uncomfortable. After all, the two sides had many conflicts before, and now the atmosphere of the meeting was so harmonious, which was really weird. He had already prepared to be driven out by Tony. No, I'll just wait for Loki. Hearing this, Tony did not force it. He moved his body slightly and changed to a comfortable posture, ready to eat melons. He didn't know why Thor came, but there must be something, otherwise, he would not come. Then, what will Loki choose? Help him or not? Tony was very curious. Before the two waited too long, Loki came out of the underground laboratory soon. He was wearing a white coat and a pair of glasses on his nose. Now he looked more and more like a scientist. As for the former evil god Loki, he could no longer see his shadow. When Thor saw Loki's image, he was shocked and opened his mouth, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. When Loki saw Thor sitting on the sofa, his originally calm expression also changed a little. What are you doing here? Aren't you afraid that I will kill you? After saying this, Thor came back to his senses immediately. He didn't care about the change in Loki's image, nor did he pay attention to his threats. Thor directly asked, do you know the seal of the god realm? As soon as this was said, Loki raised his eyebrows. Why do you suddenly ask this? Hearing this, Thor instantly understood that Loki must know, and immediately said quickly, don't worry about it, just tell me what will happen if a mortal merges with the seal. Thor was a little excited, and seeing his look, Loki didn't keep him in suspense. He will die. Loki's answer was very concise, and Thor was struck by lightning and froze in place. At this moment, Loki's voice continued. The seal of the god realm is called the Ether Particle, but it is actually a reality gem, one of the 6 gems. When it merges with a mortal, it will gradually absorb the mortal's vitality until death. Is there a way to take it out? Thor suddenly asked. The whole person's expression became more and more excited. Looking at his appearance, Loki shook his head slowly. I don't know either. Although he said so, looking at Loki's regretful expression, Thor almost guessed the answer. Suddenly, Thor's face became extremely ugly. How could this happen? He sat on the sofa, muttering to himself, and Tony listened to the conversation between the two people, his eyes full of interest. If he remembered correctly, this seemed to be the plot of Thor II in the previous life, but there was a little deviation. But it didn't matter to him. He just wanted to be a quiet spectator now. But just when he was about to continue to eat melons, someone couldn't stand it. Ding, temporary mission, the glory of darkness. Mission description, as the ultimate darkness, all darkness should be under the control of the host. Conquer or destroy the dark elves, and maintain the glory of darkness. Mission reward, number of draws +1, one of the shadow masks, the Nega mask. Hearing the prompt sound that suddenly sounded in his mind, Tony, who was quietly being a spectator, suddenly twitched his mouth. This system is no longer playing dead, and tasks come one after another. But the rewards are good. The number of draws in the ghost mask. But the shadow army is under his control. What is the function of the ghost mask? Tony was puzzled, and he couldn't figure it out after thinking for a long time, so he could only put it aside for the time being. No matter what the use is, you will know when you get the thing. Why bother to figure it out yourself? Retracting his attention from the system, looking at Thor who was still sitting on the sofa, Tony suddenly coughed lightly, attracting the attention of the two. You can't take out the reality gem. You can ask Odin to try. Just because you can't do it doesn't mean that Odin can't do it either. Hearing this, Thor's face suddenly showed a bitter smile. I'm afraid that my father can't do it, and he will just reseal the people and the seal together. Is it so cruel? Tony was a little surprised. He didn't know much about Odin, and his only knowledge came from the movie in his previous life, but the movie was obviously only a reference, and could not be a basis. The most powerful proof is the two people in front of him. In the movie, Loki is no match for Thor, and can only tease Thor with conspiracy and trickery. As a result, in reality, Thor was beaten like a dead dog by Loki. Father has great love, but because of this, as long as he thinks it is necessary to sacrifice, he will never show mercy, Thor said with a complicated tone. He used to agree with Odin's style of doing things. It is completely worthwhile to sacrifice some people for the overall situation. But now that the matter has fallen on his head, he suddenly feels unacceptable. It is not right or wrong for both parties, but they have different perspectives. If it weren't for Jane's relationship with Thor, if it were someone else, he would have taken her back to the God's realm and let Odin deal with her, and he wouldn't worry about it here. Looking at Thor's sad look, Tony shrugged his shoulders, indicating that he could do nothing to help. Loki, who had been silent on the side, slowly said at this moment, I will go back to the God's realm with you. If things can't be done, I will fight with you. If you are willing. After the words fell, the living room suddenly fell into silence. Thor looked at him in shock, and Tony also looked at him in amazement. Although he knew that Loki and Thor loved and hated each other, he didn't expect Loki to be willing to take risks for Thor. This was not just playing house. If Odin couldn't take out the other particles, then they would have to face Odin, the king of the gods. Chapter 127, Dark Elf Malekith. Loki, you. Thor looked at Loki with a complicated expression, as if he wanted to say something but stopped. Seeing his expression, Loki sneered disdainfully. Don't get me wrong, I don't mean to help you. I just want to see how much strength that old guy has left. I haven't forgotten the hatred you threw me into the abyss of the universe. After saying that, Loki snorted coldly, showing a very cold attitude. But no matter how slow Thor was, he knew that Loki was helping him, so he didn't care about Loki's attitude at all, and just said softly, thank you. After the words fell, Tony on the side clearly saw that Loki's mouth corners rose, although he quickly returned to his expressionless look, but Tony was sure that he was definitely not wrong. Suddenly, he couldn't help but complain in his heart, what a tsundere. Ignoring the affection between the two brothers, Tony said calmly, God's domain? I haven't been there yet. Remember to call me when you go. As soon as these words came out, Loki was stunned. He and Thor turned to look at Tony at the same time, as if they wanted to see clearly what he was thinking. Loki helped because they were brothers, so why did he join in the fun? They didn't think that Tony was a warm-hearted person. Whether it was Loki or Thor, they didn't dare to say that they knew Tony absolutely, but they also had a basic understanding. This was a guy who would not do anything without profit. It was harder than climbing to the sky to get him to help. For a moment, the atmosphere in the living room became weird again as Tony spoke. Thor wanted to ask why, but he couldn't say it out loud. After all, Tony was nominally there to help him. If he questioned now, it would be too unkind. He was just impulsive, not stupid. In contrast, Loki had no such scruples. Although his relationship with Tony was rather strange, they were not friends and subordinates. But compared to Thor, the two were more familiar with each other, and had no scruples when talking. What are you planning again? Loki asked doubtfully. I say, if I'm moved by your brotherly love, so I take the initiative to help you. Do you believe it? No. Without any hesitation, Loki shook his head directly. Seeing this, Tony could not help but have a clear understanding of the impression he had on others. Okay, I just want you to join the Dark Alliance, so I will take the initiative to help you and let you owe me a favor, Tony said seriously. Of course, he could not tell them that he was going to the God's domain because of the system task. So, he made up an excuse on the spot. Don't say it, this excuse is quite reasonable. At least, Loki believed it. Listening to Tony's words, Loki fell silent. After a long time, he said seriously, after this matter is over, I can consider accepting your invitation. As soon as these words came out, Tony's face suddenly showed a surprised smile. This time there was no falsehood at all. It was completely sincere. He didn't expect there would be such an unexpected surprise. He really just came up with an excuse temporarily, but he didn't expect that Loki, who had not given in for so long, actually gave in. In this way, including the system task, the trip to the God's domain has made a fortune. Thor and the others naturally didn't know Tony's excitement. At this moment, Thor felt dizzy. He just came to ask some questions, but he didn't expect to have 2 more helpers, and both of them were as thick as they could be. Needless to say, Loki was originally a god in the God's domain, and it was natural that he was powerful. But Tony was a mortal whose depth he couldn't see through. Thor suspected that even his father Odin might not be able to easily take this guy down. In short, with the help of the 2 of them, Thor felt that the trip to the God's domain was stable. He didn't stay in the villa any longer. Since he decided to take Jane back to the God's domain, he naturally had to inform her of the situation first, so Thor flew to London overnight. After Thor left, Loki also returned to the underground laboratory to continue tinkering with artificial intelligence life. Tony picked up the car keys and left the villa, heading for Potts' neighborhood. He was going to travel far away, so he naturally had to tell Potts about it so that she wouldn't worry. Just as everyone was busy with their own things, preparing for the trip to the divine realm. Deep in the universe, an extremely large spaceship was sailing in the starry sky. At the deepest part of the ship, a humanoid species with pale skin and a very different appearance from humans was sitting high on the throne at the top. He was the leader of the Dark Elves, Malekith. He exuded a cold and domineering temperament, and the captains and wizards of the Dark Elves were standing below, looking down at them from a high position. Malekith's cold voice slowly echoed in the hall. I have sensed the birth of the holy relic of my dark plan. The opportunity for us Dark Elves to dominate the universe again has come. Are you willing to follow me to kill the EC, take back the holy relic, and recreate the supreme glory of my Dark Elves? Follow the monarch until death. As Malekith's voice fell, a tsunami-like response sounded below. All the Dark Elves looked at their king with fanatical eyes. Under the leadership of Malekith, they will fight back against the Aesir again, avenge the hatred of being expelled 5,000 years ago, and dominate the universe again. Looking at the fanatical crowd below, Malekith nodded with satisfaction, and then looked towards the star system, where the EC was located. His eyes seemed to penetrate many obstacles, and fell on the fairy palace of the EC. At that moment, the whole person couldn't help but mutter to himself, Odin, I'm back. This time, I will never lose to you again. And Bol, this time, I will definitely skin you alive. As he said that, a burst of anger rose in his eyes, and he remembered the scene of being driven out of the EC like a stray dog 5,000 years ago. Blue Star. When the sun rose the next day, Thor took Jane and Loki and Tony to meet outside the villa. Looking at the 2, Thor slowly exhaled a breath of turbid air from his mouth and said, Are you ready? After the words fell, Tony and the others nodded. Seeing this, Thor looked up at the sky, and a burst of light instantly rose from his body. This is the guiding light of the God's realm. When the light blooms, the portal of the God's realm, the Rainbow Bridge, will descend and lead people into the God's realm. Soon, a rainbow bridge that ordinary people cannot see appeared in the sky. The rainbow bridge was extremely huge, spanning the entire sky, and with the guidance of the guiding light, it fell in front of Thor and his friends. Seeing this, Thor took Jane and walked directly up, and Tony and Loki followed closely behind. For the rainbow bridge, both Thor and Loki have long been accustomed to it, but Tony and Jane's eyes are full of curiosity. After all, this method is the first time for both of them. So, they all showed their human nature, curiosity. In this way, a group of people stepped onto the rainbow bridge, and their figures disappeared. Chapter 128, Knock down Heimdall with one blow. Endless void, the lair from Blue Star to the god's domain, where no living creatures exist, all things are extinct, and besides the endless void, there is only the void storm that keeps raging. Ordinary gods are trapped here, and even if they don't die in the void storm, they will die of old age here. Only the rainbow bridge can penetrate this void land, and allow people to travel between the two worlds. Tony and his party walked on the rainbow bridge, and everyone was wrapped in a layer of rainbow light, protecting them from being eroded by the void storm. After walking for an unknown period of time, several people finally left the oppressive endless void, and a dazzling light appeared at the end of the rainbow bridge, which was the entrance to the god's domain. The closer Thor got to the god's domain, the more solemn his face became, and Jane, who was following him, also had a face full of speculation and uneasiness. Thor's original hometown, at this moment, seemed like a demon that would eat people, extremely terrifying. In contrast, Tony and Loki were much more relaxed. One of them looked calm, and the other looked curiously at the light at the end of the rainbow bridge, without too many emotional fluctuations in his eyes. Finally, everyone was immersed in the light. Suddenly, a sense of space tearing appeared on everyone, making everyone feel as if they were in another world. When they opened their eyes again, they had left the rainbow bridge and appeared in a palace. This was the palace of reception of the gods, and it was also the entrance and exit of the gods. Just as the group appeared in the reception temple, a strong vibration suddenly came from a distance. Soon, a tall figure wearing a bull helmet, holding a giant sword, and full of muscular body slowly walked towards everyone. He is the guardian of the rainbow bridge of the god's passage, Heimdall. As Heimdall approached, everyone suddenly felt a huge sense of oppression. With a height of 3 meters, everyone could only look up. In front of him, everyone looked like a child, so petite. Prince Thor, Prince Loki. Heimdall took the initiative to salute. Seeing this, Thor and Loki also took the initiative to return the salute. After the salute, Heimdall's eyes immediately fell on Tony and Jane. He felt a familiar aura on Jane, and nodded in understanding, but when he looked at Tony, his eyes suddenly wrinkled. Who is he? After saying that, Thor took the initiative to say, my friend. The god's domain prohibits mortals from entering, your highness should know that. Heimdall said with a serious face, and Thor frowned immediately. I know, but he is my friend. Your highness, the rules of the god's domain cannot be broken. Heimdall did not give in at all, and Thor wanted to argue with him, but at this moment, Tony patted his shoulder and stopped him. Mortals are not allowed to enter? Doesn't that mean that mortals can enter? Tony said indifferently, and a trace of terrifying aura suddenly released from him. As he approached Heimdall, the two of them seemed to have turned around in an instant. The tall Heimdall seemed to have become a child in front of Tony at this moment, while Tony was more like a high and mighty god, full of majesty, indifferent and ruthless. For a moment, Heimdall's face changed, and a trace of shock crept onto his face. He couldn't understand why Tony, who looked like a mortal just now, became so terrifying in the blink of an eye. It was like a big bad wolf in sheep's clothing mixed in with a sheep. You thought it was a companion, so you approached it, but when you got close, you saw its bloody mouth open. It was too late to regret it at this moment. Boom. Tony moved, and 2 rays of light shot out from his eyes, carrying the power of destruction, and heading straight for Heimdall. Seeing this, Heimdall's expression changed, and suddenly divine power surged around him, and a terrible breath spread from him. The divine power wrapped around his fist, and Heimdall punched out, and the divine power in his body was instantly vented. Boom. A terrifying explosion sounded. Tony's figure was like an immortal pine, still standing firmly in place. Heimdall was directly blown away by a shockwave. Bang. The body hit the reception temple heavily, and a violent cough sounded. Drops of blood flowed from the corners of Heimdall's mouth. One blow. Just one blow. The guardian of the divine domain was directly seriously injured. At this moment, not only Heimdall, but even Loki and Thor were stunned. It's not that they haven't seen Tony before, but it wasn't so terrifying before. Why does it feel like this guy has become more than 10 times stronger after not seeing him for a few days? How did he do it? The two were shocked and thought about it, and then Tony's voice sounded. How about it? Can I go in now? After the words fell, Heimdall on the ground struggled to stand up with a bitter smile on his face. Okay, sir, please. Heimdall said respectfully. If a strong guy broke into the divine domain, Heimdall would not let him go, even if he died in battle. But Tony is Thor Loki's friend, and he refused him to enter first. So now that he was beaten by Tony showing his strength, he not only couldn't blame anything, but also had to send people in obediently. This feeling is really indescribable. If I had known earlier, why would I bother to bother? With helplessness in his heart, Heimdall led a group of people to leave the guiding temple and enter the god's domain. The god's domain is vast and boundless. After leaving the guiding temple, what appeared in front of Tony was an endless forest. Towering ancient trees pierced the sky, and all kinds of rare and exotic animals shuttled through the forest. But this was not the most eye-catching. The most noticeable thing was a piece of continent floating in the sky of the god's domain. According to Thor's introduction, the floating continent was the location of the Asgard of the god's domain, and it was also the residence of Odin, the king of the gods, and it was the destination of their trip. Compared with the blue star, the climate of the god's domain is warmer and more pleasant, but the gravity of the god's domain is also much heavier than that of the blue star. It is impossible for the life of the blue star to survive in the god's domain. Apart from anything else, the change in gravity is enough to crush them to death. No wonder the god's domain stipulates that mortals cannot enter. But this has no effect on Tony and others. With their strength, they have already ignored the change in gravity. The only one who was affected was Jane. After all, she was a real mortal. But her boyfriend was the prince of the divine realm, so with Thor's protection, the influence of gravity was not a big deal. They flew towards the sky without saying a word. After 2 hours, the suspended continent was in sight. It was not because the fairy palace was far away, but because of Jane's presence. Everyone had to slow down. After all, she was just a mortal. Although she had Thor's protection, she could not withstand too fast a speed. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129, The Anger of Old Man Odin. As they approached the floating continent, a group of palaces suddenly appeared in front of everyone, with ancient Greek-style buildings arranged in an orderly manner. One after another, the Asgardian guards exuding a terrifying aura patrolled the 4 directions. As Tony and his party approached, 2 guards in silver armor immediately came to greet them. "Greetings, sir," and the 2 princes. The guard bowed to Thor and the other 2. "Where is the king?" Heimdall took the initiative to speak. "The king is waiting for you in the hall." "I know, go and get busy, I'll take them in." "Yes, sir." The 2 guards responded respectfully, then made way, stepped aside, and watched Tony and his party walk past them. Led by Heimdall, the group walked all the way. Passing through the towering portals, they soon arrived at the deepest part of Asgard, Odin's palace. Da-da-da. A chaotic sound of footsteps echoed in the empty palace. The huge palace seemed very quiet, and there were no gods in sight, which was completely different from what Tony had imagined. Perhaps seeing the doubt in his heart, Thor, who was walking beside him, explained in a low voice, "Father needs to sleep frequently for special reasons, so the gods are generally not in Asgard." Hearing this, Tony nodded in understanding, and soon, the 2 of them walked through the hall, and came to the depths of the hall. At this time, on the throne in the depths of the hall, a figure shrouded in light was sitting high on it. Although the face could not be seen clearly, everyone could feel the terrifying power emanating from him. Especially Tony, since he merged with the magic source of the curse blue, his strength has skyrocketed. Even gods like Heimdall could not withstand his attack. But at this moment, he felt a strong threat from Odin. For a moment, Tony's face became serious. "Thor, you are here." Odin's high voice sounded on the throne. After the words fell, Thor immediately knelt on one knee. "Father, I'm back." Heimdall also knelt on one knee at the same time, to pay homage to Odin. Only Tony and the other 2 were still standing there, not moving at all. Jane was in a state of confusion, so she didn't react at all. As for Loki and Tony, they had no intention of kneeling. Needless to say, Loki and Odin had always been at odds, and it didn't matter anymore after they fell out, so naturally he wouldn't kneel. As for Tony, there was no one in the world who could make him kneel down. Although Odin was the king of the gods, Tony thought he was just that. Therefore, Tony not only didn't kneel, but also looked at Odin sitting on the throne unscrupulously. At this time, Odin's eyes fell on Loki, and a voice that couldn't be distinguished between joy and anger suddenly sounded. Loki, do you know you are wrong? What's my fault? Is it because I didn't follow your rules? Then I think I'm not wrong. Loki, who had always been aloof, suddenly became excited at this moment. As his voice fell, the atmosphere in the hall suddenly became depressing. Since you still don't know your fault, then go to the dungeon and reflect on it. Odin ignored Loki's words and planned to punish Loki directly. Seeing this scene, Thor, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly became anxious. Loki returned to the god's realm to help him, and he naturally couldn't watch Loki being punished by Odin. Therefore, he quickly interrupted and said, "Father, let's deal with the seal first." Hearing the reminder, Odin glanced at Loki and did not continue the previous topic. Instead, he turned his eyes to Jane, who was stunned. Seeing this scene, Thor quickly asked the confusion in his heart, "Father, can the seal be taken out after it merges with the mortal?" Hearing this, Odin on the throne flashed his eyes and then slowly shook his head. The seal is one of the Infinity Stones, the Reality Stone, and it cannot be taken out. As soon as these words came out, Thor's whole person was struck by lightning, and his face turned pale. Although he was worried before, his heart was still full of hope. After all, Odin is the king of the gods, a famous and powerful person in the universe. There are few things he can't do. But now, watching Odin shaking his head, Thor suddenly felt a sense of shattered hope. Then, what does father plan to do with Jane? Thor asked with a trembling voice. On the throne, Odin said without any fluctuations, "Let her stay in the god's realm. I will set aside a place for her to live, and no one will disturb her." "I don't agree." Thor's roar suddenly sounded. He was originally kneeling on the ground, but at this moment he stood up instantly, staring at Odin with anger on his face. Although Odin said it well, setting aside a place for Jane to live in the god's realm, it was actually a disguised house arrest. From now on, she could only be trapped in the god's realm. How could Thor agree? Thor's outburst not only scared the people around him, but also stunned Odin on the throne. It was the first time he saw Thor like this. However, his decision could not be changed. Therefore, although he was surprised by Thor's attitude, Odin did not intend to change his mind. "It's settled. It's useless for you to disagree. Dal, take this lady away," Odin said to Heimdall. Hearing this, Heimdall was about to take action, but he saw Thor and Loki stepped forward at the same time and blocked him. At the same time, Tony, who was holding his hands, also looked over. Looking at Tony's cold eyes, Heimdall was scared. He shrank his neck and turned to look at Odin behind him, his face full of helplessness. "How dare you?" Odin stood up from the throne with a scolding, and a terrifying aura immediately emanated from his movements. Suddenly, Thor and Loki's faces changed at the same time. They seemed to bear a heavy burden. At this moment, they looked painful, and their straight backs gradually bent down. And Odin's voice continued to sound at this moment. "You are really getting more and more daring. This matter concerns the safety of the 9 realms. You can't just say you don't agree. Take them both down, and reflect on yourself," Odin said angrily. Heimdall's expression suddenly froze. He didn't want to offend Odin at this time, so he nodded and said, "Yes." But just when he was about to take action, Tony, who had been silent, finally moved. He walked forward slowly against Odin's momentum and finally blocked Thor and the other two. Suddenly, Thor and Loki's bodies softened and almost fell to the ground. The momentum that was originally borne by the two of them was now blocked by Tony. Although he could be a quiet bystander, he promised Loki that he would help, so he naturally couldn't just stand by and watch. Chapter 130, Divine Punishment. Seeing Tony, who looked calm and not affected by his aura, Odin's expression changed slightly. He had noticed Tony just now. After all, he was the only one on the field who did not salute him. As for Jane, she was not scared. Although he thought he was a little rude, as a king of gods, he still had the most basic mind and did not take it to heart. But now seeing Tony easily blocking his aura, he immediately realized that Tony was not simple. At that moment, Odin looked at Tony up and down with a serious look and slowly said, "Who are you?" "I'm Tony Stark." Tony introduced himself with a smile. "Are you the powerful mortal? You know me." This time, it was Tony who was surprised. Is his reputation so big that even Odin has heard of it? Although I often sleep, I occasionally pay attention to the situation in the lower world. You are very strong. Thor and the others are not your opponents. However, if this is a courage you have to stand up, then there will be one more person in the Asgard dungeon today, Odin said in a majestic voice, full of the domineering aura of the king of the gods. Hearing this, Tony did not refute it. After all, Odin did make him feel dangerous. But to say that he is definitely not Odin's opponent, that is not necessarily true. After all, strength is something that is fought, not spoken. Otherwise, everyone will just release their momentum and compete. And what's the point of fighting? I'm looking forward to it, and I also want to see how strong the king of the gods is, Tony said with a smile on his lips. After the words fell, the atmosphere in the hall suddenly became solemn. How long has it been since Odin ascended the throne of the king of gods that no one dared to speak like this in front of him? At this moment, let alone Odin, even Thor and Loki couldn't help but stare at Tony's back blankly. How confident he was to challenge the king of gods in person. While everyone was staring at Tony's back in a daze, Odin, who was opposite Tony, finally made a move. Judgment. A whisper came from Odin's mouth. This is the authority of the king of gods to judge all guilty people. Suddenly, the hellfire fell from the sky and appeared in the hall. The temperature of the entire palace rose sharply and finally reached an astonishing level. Even Loki, the god of fire, faced the sudden appearance of the hellfire at this moment, and a very obvious fear appeared on his face. At this moment, Thor and Loki took Jane and quickly retreated away from Tony. Heimdall dodged to the side at the first time and did not dare to approach. All living beings in the world have sins, the only difference is how much, and the hellfire uses as fuel. If the sins are not eliminated, the hellfire will not go out. Therefore, they dare not get involved in it at all. However, compared to everyone's fear of the hellfire, Tony smiled when he saw the hellfire coming. Everything in the world has rules, and fire is no exception. Although the hellfire is terrifying, it is also bound by rules. Therefore, for Tony, who masters the rules of fire, the hellfire not only cannot cause harm, but is also a good food. Therefore, under the horrified gaze of the crowd, Tony, facing the hellfire, did not dodge or avoid it. He opened his mouth and swallowed the hellfire in the void in one mouthful, and even burped excessively. Separate seeing this scene, Loki and others suddenly felt numb on their scalps and looked at Tony as if they were looking at a monster. Gods also have 7 emotions and 6 desires. Every year, there are many gods who make mistakes in the Asi domain. Most of them are under Odin's judgment and wail in the hellfire. It can be said that the gods of the gods change color when talking about the hellfire. Now, what did they see? The hellfire that the gods of the gods feared was actually swallowed by someone. For a moment, even Odin's face twitched, and he didn't know how to comment. It tastes good. Any more? More? Tony smiled, as if he had tasted something delicious, and asked Odin for more. This arrogant attitude was so bad that even Loki and others couldn't stand it, let alone Odin. How dare you? I want to see how long you can be so arrogant. Thunder punishment, extermination, Odin said angrily. As he spoke, he raised his hand and pointed to the top of his head. The Asgard above the hall disappeared, replaced by a large sky. Suddenly, a large cloud gathered above the Asgard, and the terrifying sound of thunderstorms continued to roar in the clouds. It was different from the thunder controlled by Thor. The thunder summoned by Odin was full of the breath of destruction, and it was also one of the powers of the king of the gods. It was specially created to punish the gods who committed heinous crimes. Even gods would die under the thunder punishment. Therefore, thunder punishment is also called divine punishment. Under the cover of the divine punishment, Thor and the others trembled immediately. The destructive atmosphere in the air completely suppressed the divine power in their bodies, making them like lambs to be slaughtered, unable to resist at all. Seeing this scene, Tony no longer had the ease he had just had, and looked up at the sky with a serious face. Full. Odin's majestic voice sounded. Suddenly, the thunder rolling in the dark clouds seemed to have been summoned, and the terrifying lightning fell directly under Odin's guidance. Boom. A violent roar sounded, and everyone instantly lost their hearing. The roar, like the roar of the sky, shocked everyone, and made their minds buzz. But except for Jane, everyone still opened their eyes wide, looking at Tony under the divine punishment, wanting to see how he would deal with this scene. Under the gaze of everyone, Tony, who was bathed in lightning, moved instantly. There was no dodging, no hesitation, and a powerful force field gathered under Tony's mobilization. The surrounding gravity was transformed into repulsion. Suddenly, everyone clearly saw that the lightning, which was as fast as lightning, slowed down at a speed visible to the naked eye, and stopped directly 1 meter away from Tony. Then Tony raised his hand, and waved it suddenly. Suddenly, the destructive thunder, that was originally heading straight for him, changed its course and bombarded Odin. No one thought that Tony could forcibly change the attack direction of the thunder. Odin also did not expect this. So, caught off guard, the destructive thunder directly struck Odin. Boom. The extremely terrifying explosion sounded, and the place where Odin stood was directly submerged by the destructive thunder, the originally stable space of the god's domain. At this moment, cracks appeared under the impact of the destructive thunder. Not far away, Loki and others who were watching this scene were confused. What is this? I summoned the divine punishment to destroy myself? Thinking of this, the expressions on everyone's faces suddenly became extremely weird. Especially Loki. The corner of his mouth curled up a little, but he forced it down, looking like he wanted to laugh, but didn't dare to. Chapter 131. The Eternal Spear. As time passed, the sound of the explosion slowed down and finally disappeared. At the same time, Odin, who was originally submerged by the lightning, slowly appeared in front of everyone. Although the destructive thunder was indeed terrifying, as the king of the gods, Odin was not a vegetarian. The divine punishment that could kill ordinary gods was not enough to kill him except for some minor injuries. But even so, it was difficult to hide the anger in his heart at this moment. It was a shame that the thunder he summoned actually fell on him. Therefore, when the lightning dissipated, Odin, who was angry, also appeared in front of everyone. Compared with just now, his robes were still neat and tidy, without any embarrassment. The only difference was that the golden light that originally enveloped his body had dissipated at this moment. That was the glory of the King of Gods, not only a weapon for pretending to be powerful, but also a self-defense ability. Under the cover of the glory of the King of Gods, Odin could completely be immune to all evil and retreat. However, now, the glory of the King of Gods was destroyed by the divine punishment he summoned, and there was no way to rebuild it for the time being. I underestimated you. Your ability is even more bizarre than I thought. You can actually change the force field. You are really extraordinary, Odin said expressionlessly, his tone full of calmness, looking like a serious old man. But Thor and the other two who were familiar with Odin, their pupils shrank when they saw this scene. They knew that Odin was really angry. Tony didn't care about it. Although the scene just now was grand, both Odin and Tony knew that it was just an appetizer, not even a test. The real battle has just begun. Thank you for the compliment, but the God King should have more than this ability. Show some strength, otherwise, don't blame me for being rude. In that case, as you wish, Odin said indifferently, then raised his right hand and suddenly probed into the space beside him. Suddenly, his right hand sank directly into the space. The next second, as Odin pulled out his right hand, a golden spear was slowly pulled out of the space by him. Seeing this, Thor's pupils shrank. The spear of eternity. Loki, who didn't know what it was at first, heard this and his face changed instantly, his eyes fixed on the golden spear in Odin's right hand. There are many treasures in the god's domain, but the most famous one must be Odin's weapon, the Spear of Eternity. According to legend, the Spear of Eternity was made by the dwarves and used as a javelin. When Odin throws it, it will emit a bright light across the sky and will definitely hit the target. Moreover, the Spear of Eternity is extremely sharp and can penetrate all objects. Nothing can stop it. After that, it can automatically fly back to the owner's hand, which can be called the first killing weapon in the god realm. Legend has it that Odin defeated many opponents with the Spear of Eternity, overwhelmed the gods and successfully ascended to the throne of the God King. Unfortunately, although the legend of the Spear of Eternity has been circulating, not many people have actually seen it. Even Loki has never seen it. If Thor hadn't reminded him, he really didn't know that Odin was holding the Spear of Eternity in his hand. The two were talking loudly. Tony, who was not far away, naturally heard their conversation. Suddenly, Tony looked at the golden spear with a little more curiosity, as if he wanted to see its magic. However, before he could continue to study, Odin had already moved. Holding the Spear of Eternity, Odin's eyes were like a hawk, staring at Tony. The next second, Odin threw it suddenly, and the terrifying divine power burst out, projecting the Spear of Eternity. Clang! A sharp whistle cut through the air. The Spear of Eternity was like lightning, rushing towards Tony quickly. Wherever it passed, a sound of shattering sounded, and a clear black line appeared in the air. Looking closely, this is not a black line at all. It is simply a space crack formed by the sharp breath of the Spear of Eternity. Looking at this scene, Tony's pupils shrank instantly, and a strong sense of crisis rose in his heart. Even if he dared to take the divine punishment just now, Tony felt that, if he took it hard, something terrible would happen. Although this feeling was a bit strange, Tony did not hesitate, and believed in his intuition. At that moment, Tony moved, and his figure flashed and disappeared in an instant, trying to avoid the attack of the Eternal Spear. With the blessing of the rabbit's spell, his speed was comparable to light. Therefore, although the speed of the Eternal Spear was fast, it still couldn't keep up with Tony's speed. However, the Eternal Spear had a bug, that it would hit the target when thrown. As long as it didn't attack the enemy, it would keep chasing. Therefore, although Tony used speed to distance himself from the Eternal Spear had no intention of stopping at all, and kept chasing him behind. Looking at this scene, Tony couldn't help but curse in his heart. It was just a cowhide plaster, and he couldn't get rid of it. Helplessly, Tony could only dodge while thinking about solutions. Soon, his eyes locked on Odin not far away. Seeing Odin calmly watching him being chased by the Eternal Spear, Tony suddenly had an idea in his mind. The Eternal Spear must hit the target when thrown, but it does not mean that it must hit itself. If it hits someone other than the target, it can also be used. This is an idea that suddenly came to Tony's mind. He didn't know if it was feasible, but he didn't mind experimenting. As for why Odin was chosen, it was even simpler. Loki and the other two in the hall were his own people. Although Heimdall was not, Tony didn't bother to find someone else as a scapegoat. Therefore, Odin, the culprit, was the most suitable target. With this thought, Tony immediately turned around and rushed towards Odin. Two lasers burst out in his eyes and bombarded Odin. Seeing Tony staring at him, Odin also raised his eyebrows and raised his hand. A beam of light burst out from his fingertips and met Tony's attack. The two attacks collided in mid-air and made a burst of explosion. Taking this opportunity, Tony approached Odin and punched Odin in the face. Odin raised his hand to block. With the bull spell, Tony's power was extremely terrifying. Even Odin could not match it. Therefore, a punch landed on Odin's palm, and Odin was immediately knocked back several steps. Seeing this, Odin was angry. How could he, a dignified god king, be repelled by a mortal? At that moment, Odin rushed up quickly, and the two figures collided directly. Due to the extremely fast speed of the two, Loki and others on the side could only see a series of after images flashing in the air. The dull sound of body collisions in the hall continued to sound. While the two were fighting, Tony also paid attention to the Eternal Spear behind him, so while fighting with Odin, he continued to distance himself from the Eternal Spear. In this way, the two quickly left the palace. Chapter 132 Do you want to come again? Outside the Asgard, above the sky, two figures collided like lightning. The terrifying sound waves spread in all directions as the two fought. The Eternal Spear kept chasing behind them, making more and more noise. Before, in the palace, Tony and Odin had been restrained to avoid affecting the three of them because of the presence of Loki and others. Now, after leaving the palace, the two of them let go completely. For a while, the fluctuations of the two people's fight alarmed the gods of the entire Asgard. The fluctuations of the fight between one man and one god spread throughout the floating continent, and many gods living in seclusion on the continent looked up at the sky. Looking at the fierce fight between Tony and Odin, everyone's eyes showed a hint of shock. Suddenly, Tony's force field rotated, binding Odin, and a huge force instantly acted on Odin. Suddenly, Odin's figure stopped, and his expression changed. Ha! A loud shout came out from his mouth, and the divine power in Odin's body suddenly surged wildly, trying to break free from the shackles of the force field. The golden divine power enveloped his whole body, and the terrifying power fluctuations made the sky shake endlessly, and a ray of aftermath fell on the floating continent below. Crack. A burst of shattering sounds rang out, and a huge crack suddenly appeared on the floating continent below. Soon, the crack evolved into a canyon, lying across the continent. This is Odin's strength. One blow is enough to shatter a star and destroy the earth. Even if a ray of divine power leaks, it is enough to destroy most things in the world. But, he is strong, and Tony is stronger. The cow charm, rabbit charm, sheep charm, cursed blue magic and many other abilities have made his strength reach a terrifying level. Now that he is fully exerted, even Odin can hardly break free from the shackles of the force field for a while. If it were any other time, it wouldn't matter. Although the force field trapped Odin, it would not be easy for Tony to hurt him. But the bad thing is, the Spear of Eternity. At this moment, the Spear of Eternity still hadn't hit the target, so it had been following Tony. At the moment, when Odin was trapped, Tony flashed and appeared directly behind Odin. The next second, Tony held Odin in one hand and rushed towards the Spear of Eternity without hesitation. Seeing this, Odin's face changed completely. He knew what Tony was going to do. At that moment, the divine power in his body became more agitated, and an extremely powerful force burst out from him. Crack. The force field that was originally bound to him was gradually broken free by him. Tony, who controlled the force field to trap Odin, was also hit by the divine power under Odin's counterattack. Suddenly, a trace of blood flowed from the corner of Tony's mouth, making him look quite embarrassed. But Tony was not panicked at all, but laughed out loud. You are afraid, but it's too late. It is said that the eternal spear is sharp and unparalleled. Today, I will let you experience for yourself how powerful your weapon is. As he spoke, Tony burst out the power of the rabbit spell, and his speed instantly reached the extreme. Odin roared in anger, and broke free from the restraints of the force field at this moment. But everything was too late. Puff. With a sound of flesh piercing, the eternal spear directly penetrated Odin's body. The extreme killing directly tore through his body defense, making Odin's face pale. Tony's plan was successful. He used Odin to successfully block the eternal spear that was bound to hit. However, he also failed because he ignored the power of the eternal spear. After piercing Odin's body, the eternal spear continued to move forward and also penetrated his body. At this moment, Tony and Odin's figures fell from the sky at the same time and smashed into the Asgard below. Tony, King. A burst of anxious shouts rang out below. Loki and Heimdall quickly flew towards the two people who fell. Soon, the two successfully caught the two people who fell, their faces full of anxiety. King, Tony, are you okay? Loki and Heimdall's voices sounded at the same time. Odin fell into Heimdall's arms, coughing continuously, and every cough brought out a lot of blood from his mouth. He was hit by the eternal spear head on, and his injuries were much more serious than Tony's. This was because the power of the eternal spear's first attack was the greatest. In comparison, Tony, who was pierced by it, was much less injured. After all, most of the attacks of the eternal spear were borne by Odin, and he was just an innocent victim. Therefore, when Odin looked seriously injured and dying, Tony had already stood up by himself. He waved to Loki to indicate that he was fine, and Tony looked at Odin with a smile on his face. Old man, I won this battle. After saying that, Tony looked down at the big hole in his chest and grimaced. It hurts. As soon as he finished speaking, a green life energy emerged on his chest. Suddenly, the exaggeratedly large hole on his chest healed at a speed visible to the naked eye under the shocked expressions of everyone. In a blink of an eye, Tony was completely restored to his original state. If it weren't for the big hole left on his clothes, it would be impossible to tell that he had been injured. This was exactly the first talisman Tony got, the power of the horse talisman, which drove away all external forces and curses. Loki was so shocked that he couldn't speak at all, and the shock on his face could not dissipate for a long time. Even Odin, who was not far away, was dumbfounded. Damn, isn't this cheating? You were also pierced by the eternal spear. Even if your injuries were lighter, you can't heal instantly. That was the injury caused by the eternal spear, not the injury caused by some ordinary soldier. For a moment, everyone didn't know what to say, especially Loki, who felt that he was worrying for nothing. This guy has more tricks than I thought. Ahem. Coughing again, Odin pushed Heimdall away and struggled to stand up from the ground. At the same time, the big hole in his chest healed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, he was back to normal. But unlike Tony was fully recovered. Not only did he recover his body, but he also dispelled the remaining laws of the eternal spear. Odin only recovered on the surface. In fact, his injuries were still serious. The laws left by the eternal spear could only be slowly eliminated later. Everyone knew this, but no one pointed it out, especially Heimdall and other gods loyal to Odin, who were full of joy, as if Odin had really recovered. In fact, it was just to give Odin a face. Otherwise, if others had recovered, you, the king of the gods, would still look lifeless, which was really embarrassing. He, the king of the gods, didn't he have any face? Not far away, Tony watched this scene, and the corners of his mouth rose, revealing a smile. How about it? Do you want to come again? Chapter 133, The Day of Celestial Aggregation. Tony's provocative words rang out, but this time, Odin didn't have the domineering attitude just now. There was no way. They had fought to a draw before he was injured, and now that he was injured, how could he still be an opponent? Besides, Odin was too old and close to his death. If he hadn't been sleeping frequently, he might have died long ago. Moreover, Odin was still suppressing his eldest daughter Hela, and the strength he could exert was limited. At this moment, if he hadn't risked his life, he might not have been able to take down Tony. Odin was not a masochist, so in the face of Tony's provocation, this time, he did not respond, but coughed lightly, and changed the subject. This matter ends here. You can take the three of them away if you want, but if something happens on Blue Star, you will be responsible for solving it yourself. Odin said calmly, and after that, he turned around and left, no longer paying attention to Tony. Beside Tony, Thor and Jane showed joy on their faces, and their eyes looking at Tony were full of gratitude. At that moment, Thor said excitedly, "Thank you, Tony. I will never refuse any help I can give you in the future." After that, Thor bowed excitedly. Tony knew Thor's pride. This guy was not someone who would bow his head easily. He was obviously grateful to him from the bottom of his heart for making him do such a big gift. However, compared with Thor, Tony valued Loki more. He immediately said with a wave of favorability, "Thank Loki if you want to thank him. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't bother to get involved in this matter." After these words came out, Thor didn't feel much. He was also full of gratitude to Loki. But Loki, after hearing what Tony said, was stunned for a moment, and his eyes turned strange when he looked at Tony. He has always been a person who lacks attention. The reason why he did so many things is largely because he wants to attract attention. So, when Tony's voice fell, an inexplicable feeling of emotion slowly rose in Loki's heart. Tony's image in his eyes gradually became taller. If he had felt reluctant to join Tony before, now, he suddenly felt that joining Tony was not a bad thing. Just when Loki was moved by Tony's words, Thor took the initiative to say, "You must be tired. I'll arrange for you to rest first, and take you to see the scenery of the god's domain." Thor looked at Jane and Tony. After all, they were the only ones who came to the god's domain for the first time. Facing Thor's question, Jane nodded silently. She had no opinion at all now, so she naturally let Thor arrange it. As for Tony, he was still waiting to complete the task, so he naturally didn't refute. "Okay, that's troublesome." Tony smiled and nodded slowly. At that moment, the group returned to the Asgard under the leadership of Thor. But this time they did not go to the Golden Palace. but to Thor's palace. As a prince of the EC, he naturally had his own bedroom, which was enough for them to live in. While Thor was arranging for them to stay, the Dark Elf spaceships were approaching Asgard in the galaxy outside Asgard. Malekith was still sitting high on the throne, looking through the obstacles at Asgard, a billion light years away, with a deep look in his eyes. It's almost time. The day of celestial gathering is coming soon, and the day of celestial gathering is the day of Asgard's destruction. He muttered to himself in a cold tone, with a flash of expectation in his eyes. Asgard is the base camp of the god's domain. It is natural that its defense is strong. In normal times, there is no way to enter from other places except through the Rainbow Bridge. Once the Rainbow Bridge is closed, the enemy can be completely isolated from Asgard. However, there is no perfect defense in the world, and the same is true for Asgard. Because the 9 realms have been revolving around the atrium, every 5,000 years, the 9 realms will form a straight line, and this day is also called the Day of Celestial Gathering. Every time the celestial bodies gather, the borders of the 9 realms will be in a state of chaos. The originally unbreakable defense will also have flaws, allowing creatures from the outside world to enter Asgard without going through the passage. This is why Malekith waited for 5,000 years before making a comeback. If he missed this time, he would have to wait another 5,000 years. Therefore, he took this action very seriously. Thinking of this, Malekith on the throne suddenly said, "Come here." As soon as he finished speaking, a dark elf stepped into the hall. "King, go wake up Algorim," Malekith said in a deep voice, and the dark elves below couldn't help but change their expressions. Algorim is Malekith's right-hand man and a strong man of the Dark Elf clan. Due to lifespan issues, he had to sleep deep in the spaceship to slow down the consumption of his lifespan. I don't know why the king would wake up Algorim at this time. They should be some distance away from Asgard. He was full of confusion, but he didn't dare to refute the king's will, so he agreed immediately. "Understood, king. I will arrange it right away." After saying that, the dark elf left the hall and walked towards the depths of the spaceship with a few people. Soon, in the dormant chamber deep in the spaceship, a humanoid creature with a black body was awakened. As he woke up, a strong momentum suddenly emanated from him, causing the faces of the many dark elves who awakened him to change, and they quickly lowered their heads. After all, this lord was famous for his cruelty. No one knew whether he would tear them to pieces because of their disturbance after waking up from a deep sleep, so everyone seemed very respectful. Fortunately, the thing they were most worried about did not happen. Although the awakened Algorim's face was filled with a trace of anger, he did not take action. "Who woke me up? What happened?" Algorim's voice sounded. Seeing this, the dark elf who had met Malekith before hurried forward and said respectfully, "My lord, the king is calling you to see him." As soon as he finished speaking, Algorim's slightly confused expression suddenly disappeared, and the whole person woke up instantly. "The king summoned me? Take me to see the king." "Yes, my lord." The dark elf responded respectfully, and then led Algorim out of the hibernation chamber and walked towards the hall. Soon, he saw Malekith in the hall. "Algorim sees the king," Algorim said in a loud voice, full of respect. Looking at him, Malekith showed a smile on his face. "Long time no see. It's my fault for waking you up early." "King, what are you talking about? I'm the sharp blade in your hand. As long as you need me, I will do anything." "I don't know what you want me to do," Algorith said loyally. Hearing this, Malekith nodded with satisfaction, and then said slowly, 5,000 years have passed. It's finally the day for our dark elves to take revenge. I need your help with something. Chapter 134. Are you ready to die? What is it? Algorith spoke again. Malekith did not keep him in suspense, and directly told him his plan. Although the day of the celestial bodies gathering is approaching, I plan to let you enter Asgard in advance to act as an insider. At the critical moment, destroy Asgard's defenses and search for the whereabouts of my dark elves and other particles. Algorith frowned immediately after he finished speaking. I have no objection to the king's arrangement. But if I want to enter Asgard in advance, I can only take the Rainbow Channel. The strength of the EC cannot be underestimated. Once I enter, they will definitely find me. I'm not afraid of life and death, but I'm afraid that I will not be able to complete the king's order. What you said, I naturally considered it. Look at what this is. As he said, Malekith flipped his hand and suddenly a black stone appeared in Malekith's hand. Seeing this, Algorith's expression changed. This is a cursed stone, the key to creating a cursed warrior. That's right. Take this stone, and after entering Asgard, take it according to the situation. By then, you will be able to break free from the shackles and complete the mission as a cursed warrior. Thank you, King. Algorim said slowly with a hint of excitement in his eyes. The cursed warrior is the most powerful warrior among the Dark Elves. 5,000 years ago, the Dark Elves were able to dominate the universe, and the cursed warrior played a great role. But with the consumption of the cursed stone, and the Dark Elves were driven out of Asgard, the cursed stones in their hands became less and less, and even gradually disappeared. In the end, the once famous cursed warriors became a dead end. He didn't expect that Malekith still had a cursed stone in his hand, and now he gave it to him. As long as he merged with the cursed stone, his strength would definitely increase greatly. How could he miss such a good thing? Go, don't let me down. Malekith threw the cursed stone directly to Algorim, saying in a faint tone. Algorim nodded heavily, without saying anything to express his determination, and turned around, and walked out of the hall. Soon, a spaceship broke away from the spaceship and headed towards Asgard, using space jump technology, and disappeared from the sight of the spaceship in the blink of an eye. Rainbow Bridge, the entrance to Asgard. There are Asgardian warriors stationed here all year round, and the guards are very strict. Suddenly, a violent space fluctuation came from outside, which directly alarmed the Asgardian warriors guarding the Rainbow Bridge. Who are you? This is a forbidden place in the divine domain. You are not allowed to trespass. Stop. An Asgardian warrior in armor stood on the Rainbow Bridge and shouted loudly. Soon, a spaceship appeared in front of him. Without any hesitation, two missile-like things were launched directly from the spaceship and bombarded the Asgardian warriors. Seeing this scene, the Asgardian warrior who was blocking the way suddenly changed his face, and a sharp roar suddenly sounded from his mouth. Enemy attack, notify the Guardian. As soon as the words fell, boom. The shells fell on him, and he was drowned by the explosion without time to dodge. All of a sudden, all the Asgardian warriors guarding the Rainbow Bridge took action to stop the invaders. Some people also took the opportunity to quickly pass on the message. Soon, Heimdall, who walked out of Odin's golden palace on the floating continent, received a distress signal, and his face suddenly changed. Damn, something happened. Heimdall cursed inwardly, and his figure instantly soared into the sky, and flew quickly towards the direction of the Rainbow Bridge. At this moment, a bloody massacre was unfolding on the Rainbow Bridge. Algorim, as one of the strongest men in the Dark Elves, was not something that these Asgardian warriors could stop. In just a few moments, more than 10 Asgardian warriors were blown up alive by him. For a while, the remaining half of the Asgardian warriors looked at Algorim with fear. However, as Odin's army, they had faith in their hearts. Even though Algorim's performance was very terrifying and made everyone tremble, no one chose to retreat. On the contrary, watching Algorim approaching the Temple of Guidance, a loud shout rang out among the many Asgardian warriors. Brothers, the time has come to serve the king with loyalty. Everyone, follow me and kill him. Even if you die, you can't let him step into the Temple of Guidance. Kill. The people who were still alive shouted in unison. The loud roar dispelled the fear in everyone's hearts, and suddenly, everyone rushed towards Algorim fearlessly. Seeing this scene, Algorim's mouth curled up with a disdainful smile. Mayfly shaking the tree, looking for death. After saying that, a burst of black divine power flashed on his body. His punches and kicks were all powerful, which was not comparable to these ordinary Asgardian warriors. In just a few breaths, many Asgardian warriors fell to the ground. Most of them were directly hammered to death by Algorim. Even if there were one or two lucky ones who escaped by chance, they completely lost their combat effectiveness. Just when Algorim was about to step into the reception temple, suddenly, the space portal in the reception temple lit up, and Heimdall's tall figure suddenly appeared in the reception temple. He glanced and saw that the reception temple was empty, and a bad premonition suddenly emerged in his heart. At the moment, he had no time to investigate carefully, and quickly sent out his mental power. Suddenly, the scene on the Rainbow Bridge appeared in his eyes. I saw that on the Rainbow Bridge. There were corpses lying in all directions. Those were all his colleagues and subordinates. But now, all of them are dead, except for a few seriously injured and dying. Most of them are dead. Suddenly, a roar sounded, and a powerful momentum emanated directly from him. Who did it? Heimdall roared angrily, and at this moment, a light voice came from the door of the reception temple. I did it. The next second Algorim's figure appeared in Heimdall's eyes. Seeing him, Heimdall frowned immediately, and his eyes gradually became solemn. Dark elves. Heimdall used a question, but his tone was full of affirmation. Obviously, he had already confirmed the identity of the visitor in his mind, and the reason he asked again was just to confirm it. When Algorim heard this, he did not refute it. His mission here was to be an undercover agent, so naturally he came as arrogant as possible. I didn't expect the EC to still remember my dark elves. Now, the time for our revenge has come. Are you ready to face death? Chapter 135 Odin's Concerns. Algorim's arrogant voice sounded, with a playful smile on his lips. Humph. Heimdall snorted coldly, and said in a cold tone, you are just a defeated general, and you dare to enter the divine domain again. Today I will leave you here completely. After saying that, Heimdall didn't want to waste any more words, and directly drew out the sword at his waist, and chopped it up. With the blessing of divine power, his sword was powerful enough to split the mountain. Whoosh! A strong sound of breaking through the air sounded, and the air was torn apart in an instant. Seeing this, Algorim's pupils shrank, and a dark breath permeated from him, and a pure black sword was immediately drawn out from his waist. Dang. The sound of metal clashing sounded, and a knife and a sword collided in the air, making a sound. The speed of the two people was at its peak at this moment, and their figures kept intertwining, leaving a trail of after images in the reception hall. Waves of divine power shook the four directions. If it weren't for the god's formation in the hall of reception, it would have been destroyed by the aftermath of the fight between the two. However, as time passed, Algorim gradually showed signs of being defeated, allowing Heimdall to gain the upper hand. In order to delay the consumption of his lifespan, he spent nearly 5,000 years in deep sleep. Not only did his strength not reach its peak, but it even declined slightly. In contrast, Heimdall has been guarding the Rainbow Bridge, and his strength has been improving, so Algorim is naturally not his opponent. The suppressed Algorim's face was also full of anger at this moment. Although he was prepared to be defeated and captured before he came, in his opinion, at least the gods of the EC should have taken action to stop him. But now, Heimdall, a mere gatekeeper, has prevented him from making any progress, which is really a shame. But the gap in strength cannot be eliminated by unwillingness, so no matter how reluctant he is, his ending is ultimately doomed. Bang! Heimdall raised his sword, and knocked the sword out of his hand. Then he pierced his chest with the sword, and took him down completely. Huff, huff, huff. A strong gasp came from Algorim's mouth. Heimdall held the sword in one hand, and stepped on his chest with one foot, with a mocking smile on his lips. Is this the strength of your dark elves? You want revenge with this strength? It's just wishful thinking. After saying that, Heimdall directly sealed the divine power in his body, lifted him up with one hand, turned around and passed through the space gate and entered Asgard. As for the follow-up here, he didn't need to worry about it. There would be Asgard warriors to clean up the battlefield. In the floating continent, in the Asgard, Heimdall carried Algorim, and stepped into the Golden Palace, Odin's residence. On the throne, Odin sat majestically, but there was no golden light around him. But even so, it still did not damage his majesty as the God King. When Heimdall stepped into the Golden Palace, Odin opened his eyes immediately, and a gleam of brilliance flashed in his eyes. Before he could speak, Heimdall had already thrown Algorim to the ground, knelt on one knee and said, "King, we have captured a remnant of the Dark Elf clan." "Got it?" Odin responded. His eyes fell on Algorim, staring at him deeply. "Where is Malekith? Why are you alone?" Odin asked in a flat tone. On the ground, although Algorim looked embarrassed, he was still tough. "Odin, I haven't seen you for so long. Have you become so old? My king will return to the god's domain soon. From the looks of you, you are not my king's opponent at all. I advise you to surrender early now, and pray for my king to forgive you, so that you can still have a glimmer of hope." Algorim was also a figure from 5,000 years ago. When he once fought with Odin, he was a general of the Dark Elf clan. So he was no stranger to Odin, so he was not polite at all when he spoke, and he did not take him, the king of the gods, seriously at all. Odin did not care about this. After all, the two sides were enemies, and Algorim was famous for his brutality. If he was really polite to him, it would be abnormal. Really? You used to be a strong man of the Dark Elves, but now you can't even enter the gate of the gods' realm. Do you think I will be afraid of Malekith? Odin said with a tone full of sarcasm, which instantly hit Algorim's sore spot. At that moment, he seemed more arrogant. I'm old, but a waste. It is worth it for you to be complacent for defeating a waste like me. Wait, when my dark army comes, I will definitely slaughter the entire god's realm. Algorim kept shouting, but Odin lost interest in continuing to talk with him. He also knew that it was impossible to ask something from him, so he waved his hand directly. Put him in the dungeon. Yes, my king. Heimdall responded respectfully and summoned two Asgardian guards to send Algorim to the dungeon. After the man was taken away, Odin on the throne suddenly showed a trace of worry. Troubled times. Seeing his expression, Heimdall was stunned for a moment and said subconsciously, King, are you worried? In my opinion, the strength of the Dark Elves is just like this. Besides, as long as the Rainbow Bridge is closed, they can't enter Asgard. There is no need to worry. Heimdall said seriously. He has guarded the entrance to the god's domain for many years. No one knows the defense of the god's domain better than him. As long as the Rainbow Bridge is closed, even Odin can't break into the god's domain from the outside. Listening to his words, Odin glanced at him and said in a calm tone, the day of the celestial gathering is coming soon. As soon as these words came out, Heimdall was stunned, and the whole person reacted quickly, frowning slightly. Yes, I neglected it. On the day of the celestial bodies gathering, there are indeed some troubles. Heimdall naturally knew what the day of the celestial bodies gathering represented, but he just didn't react to it just now. But even so, he was not too afraid. No matter what, my god realm is not afraid of any enemy. Please rest assured, King, we will definitely defend Asgard to the death. I'm not worried about the loyalty of the gods, but Malekith is not bad. 5,000 years have passed, and his strength may be stronger. Originally, I was not afraid of him, but I was seriously injured in the previous battle with that mortal, and I'm afraid it will be difficult to stop that guy. Odin expressed his concerns. Heimdall was speechless. They can still deal with ordinary strong men, but if it is a top strong man at the level of Odin, they can't match it. Therefore, when Odin finished speaking, Heimdall didn't know how to speak for a while. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136 What I See Is Mine. Just when Heimdall was silent, Odin, who was sitting on the throne, suddenly said, is that mortal still in the god's domain? Yes, in Prince Thor's palace. Tomorrow, I will hold a banquet in the back garden. Please invite him over. Yes, King. Heimdall said respectfully, but his tone seemed a little strange. Is it appropriate for a mortal to solve the crisis in the god's domain? He thought strangely in his heart, but thinking about Tony's terrifying strength, Heimdall was relieved again. He could tie with Odin and even severely damage Odin's existence. If he took action, the crisis in the god's domain would not be a big deal. While thinking, Heimdall quietly retreated and stopped disturbing Odin. Soon, a day passed silently. Unlike the time on Blue Star, the god's domain has 36 hours a day, and the night is almost twice as long as that of Blue Star. When Tony woke up from Thor's palace the next day, he saw Heimdall waiting at the door. As soon as he opened the palace, looking at him, Tony raised his eyebrows and smiled. What's the matter with you looking for me so early? As the saying goes, no one comes to see you for no reason. He had just seriously injured Odin not long ago. Heimdall and his men had no time to hide from him, and were waiting outside his door early in the morning. Tony didn't believe it, if he said it was nothing. Hearing this, Heimdall didn't hesitate, and directly stated his purpose. King, please go to a banquet at noon. I specially asked you to inform you. Invite me to a banquet? Tony's eyes flashed with surprise. He and Odin don't have a good relationship. It's impossible for Odin to appreciate heroes. Why would he invite me to a banquet? Suspicious. Tony didn't refuse. He wanted to see what Odin was up to. Okay, I'll be on time. Then I won't bother you anymore. I'll take my leave first. Heimdall said respectfully. Then he turned around and disappeared from Tony's sight. It is an iron rule in the extraordinary world to be respectful to the strong. Even though Tony was still a mortal in Heimdall's eyes, with his strong strength, even a mortal deserved his respect. In a blink of an eye, the sun rose above the branches, and the sun was hanging high in the sky. Heimdall, who had disappeared for a whole morning, appeared outside Tony's palace again, and led the way for Tony. The two left Thor's palace, and walked towards the depths of the Asgard. The back garden was Odin's residence. When Tony followed Heimdall into the back garden, a maid had already prepared a banquet here. Unlike the imagined banquet, there were only one man and one woman at the table. The man was naturally Odin, the king of the gods. Although Tony didn't know the woman, he could also infer that she should be the queen of the Aesir, Frigga, and Thor's mother. After all, only she could be on an equal footing with Odin. Looking at the two, Tony nodded with a smile on his face. Meet the God King and this beautiful lady. After the words fell, Frigga smiled gently, full of a loving breath. You must be Tony, right? Come and sit down. Today is just an ordinary family dinner. No need to be so polite. Hearing this, Tony smiled and nodded, and sat directly opposite the two. Perhaps because the previous encounter was not pleasant, Tony and Odin did not have much to say, and the two did not communicate at all. But Frigga, the queen, and Tony got along very well. One was elegant and generous, and the other was graceful. Those who didn't know would think that Odin was the redundant one. With Frigga easing the atmosphere in the middle, Tony and Odin were no longer silent as they were at the beginning, and occasionally they would talk to each other. When they felt that the atmosphere was about right, Frigga stood up and said, I still have something to deal with. Tony, enjoy your meal. I'll leave first. Queen, you don't have to be polite. Business is more important. Hearing this, Frigga nodded, stood up and left the banquet. Suddenly, only Tony and Odin were left at the table. Looking at Odin, Tony took the wine glass on the table and took a sip. With a smile on his face, he said, God, please speak directly if you have something to say. I'm not interested in wasting time with you if you continue to be so stiff. Hearing this, Odin's face darkened. If he had been more domineering before, he would have turned hostile at this moment. But now he could only swallow his anger. Of course, the more important thing was that he could not beat Tony even if he fought, so he was helpless. 5,000 years ago, there was a great war in my god's domain. At that time, the ruler of God's domain was not our Aesir, but the Dark Elves. At that time, my god's race tried its best to drive out the Dark Elves, in exchange for 5,000 years of peace in God's domain. But recently, the Dark Elves are planning to make a comeback. I'm now as strong as ever, and I may not be the opponent of the Dark Elf King Malekith, so I would like to ask you for help. Odin said calmly, and Tony raised his eyebrows instantly after listening. Before, he was wondering why there was no action on the tasks issued by the system. He didn't expect that it was waiting for him here. Even if Odin didn't speak, he would have to take action. However, since he spoke, he would not give up the opportunity to kill the gods. So you gods have such enemies? Tony pretended not to know. But, according to what you said, the Dark Elves are so powerful, why should I work hard for you? Tony said with a playful smile on his face. Odin was not surprised by his performance. From the beginning, he saw that Tony was not a good person. Tell me your conditions. As long as it's not too much, I can agree to it. Odin kicked the ball back directly. He didn't want to argue with Tony. Frank, you are worthy of being the king of gods. How about this? You give me the spear of eternity, and I will help. Tony said in a calm tone. Those who didn't know would think that he just made a condition casually. After hearing his request, Odin almost couldn't breathe. Good guy, he asked for the spear of eternity right away. Why don't you go and grab it? Suddenly, Odin's face darkened, and he suppressed a hint of anger in his tone and said, no, I can't give you the spear of eternity. Change it. Hearing this, Tony raised his eyebrows. He just needed to complete the system task. Otherwise, if Odin dared to refuse his conditions, he would just say goodbye to him. There was no point in talking. However, it would be a waste not to take the benefits that were given for free. Seeing Odin's insistence, Tony could only shrug and change the conditions. How about this? Let me go into your god's treasury and pick 3 things. The ones I like are mine. If you don't agree, then there's no need to talk. Deal. Chapter 137. Poor Loki is still imprisoned. Odin agreed very readily this time without arguing with Tony. In fact, if Tony hadn't asked for the Spear of Eternity, Odin would have agreed just now. Fortunately, the two sides have successfully reached a cooperation, and Odin was relieved. After the negotiation, Tony left the back garden without staying any longer. Odin naturally wouldn't keep him. Returning to Thor's palace, as soon as he entered the door, Tony saw Thor sighing in the hall. Seeing his sad face, Tony couldn't help asking, "What's wrong?" After saying that, Thor glanced at Tony, who had entered the door, and smiled helplessly. "It's still about the other particles. That thing has been absorbing Jane's vitality. If it continues like this, Jane may not be able to hold on for long." Hearing this, Tony couldn't help but flash a trace of astonishment on his face, and then shrugged helplessly, indicating that he could do nothing to help. If it was a common injury, he could still try the horse charm, but that thing was one of the infinite gems in the universe. In the world of immortals, it was a divine artifact. No matter how powerful the horse charm was, it was not easy to deal with such a high-level thing. Besides, he had obtained many charms now, and there were conflicts between them. Although this conflict was small, Tony could still feel it. He had no solution to this situation, and could only hope that he could draw the tiger charm as soon as possible. Before that, Tony would not use his full strength to activate any charm, otherwise the conflict would continue to expand. However, just as he was about to leave, a flash of lightning suddenly flashed through his mind, and the corners of his mouth could not help but curl up. "I suddenly thought of a way. Do you want to try it?" As soon as these words came out, Thor, who was originally frowning, instantly became energetic. "What way?" After saying that, he looked at Tony with expectation. Tony didn't keep the secret and said directly, "Although we can't do anything with this thing, isn't it the sacred object of the Dark Elves? They should be able to take it out." Hearing this, Thor's originally excited expression suddenly shrank like a deflated ball. During this period, in order to find a solution, he almost read most of the Protoss's books, and naturally knew that the other particles were the sacred objects of the Dark Elves. The problem is that the Dark Elves were expelled by the Protoss 5,000 years ago. Where can he find the Dark Elves in this vast universe? Looking at Thor's deflated look, Tony probably knew what he was thinking, and coughed lightly. "I just came back from Odin, and he told me that the Dark Elves seem to be planning to launch a war against the God's realm in the near future." After speaking, Thor, who was originally like an eggplant hit by frost, became excited instantly. "Really?" Looking at his excited look, although Tony knew that he was excited because Jane was saved, he still felt a little weird. Who would be excited knowing that their family is going to be beaten? Seeing Tony looking at him with strange eyes, Thor also realized that he had acted a little too much. He coughed lightly, and his face quickly became heavy. He said, "They are just a bunch of losers. As long as they come, I will never let them go." "Okay, stop pretending." Tony interrupted him, who was turning into a drama queen. "Although the Dark Elves have reappeared, there is indeed a chance to take out the other particles in Giant's body. However, that is the holy object of the Dark Elves, and not every Dark Elf can touch it. So, if you want to take out the other particles, maybe only the King of the Dark Elves can do it. You should think about how to make people willingly take that thing out. Don't think about using force. That guy should be quite strong. Your father asked me to deal with him. I'm not sure I can capture him alive. So, you have to find a way yourself." After pouring a basin of cold water on Thor, Tony staggered away. Anyway, he had given the method, and he didn't care about the specific operation. After hearing what Tony said, Thor came back from his excitement and frowned. He wanted to think of a solution by himself, but unfortunately, with his muscular head, he couldn't think of any good solution. Helplessly, Thor could only find Loki and ask Loki to help him with the plan. As the god of mischief and lies, Loki's brain is much more useful than his. Sure enough, soon, Loki gave a solution, a counter-espionage plan. The news that Algorim was captured had spread throughout the god's realm. He pretended to be an enemy of Thor and was imprisoned in the god's realm dungeon. When the Dark Elves arrived, he would escape with the guy named Algorim. With his previous style, he should be able to win the trust of the Dark Elves. At that time, he would hand Jane over to the Dark Elves, and he should be able to remove the other particles in her body. The only problem is whether Jane would be hurt at that time, and no one can guarantee this. But just when the two couldn't make a decision, Jane appeared in the hall and agreed to the plan proposed by Loki. According to her words, if the ether particles are not taken out, she will die sooner or later, so why not take her chance now? This made Thor speechless and he could only agree to this plan. Therefore, soon, Loki was sealed by Heimdall and thrown into the dungeon. In the god's domain dungeon, Algorim looked at Loki who was thrown into the cell next to him, and a trace of curiosity flashed in his eyes. Since Odin has ruled the god's domain for a long time, no gods dared to violate his majesty, so the god's domain dungeon has almost become a decoration. Algorim is almost the first prisoner in nearly 1,000 years. Now, there is one more in the dungeon. How can he not be curious? Hey, what did you do to get in here? None of your business. Loki acted very arrogantly, and his attitude was not friendly. Algorim didn't care about this. As an insider of the Dark Elves, he was confident that he could complete the task assigned by Malekith. But if he could have one more helper, he would also be willing. So, ignoring Loki's attitude, Algorim continued to talk to him. With his unremitting efforts, Loki gradually revealed his identity and why he was thrown into the dungeon. As the god of lies, Loki knew that pure lies could not convince the guy in front of him. So what he said was almost 9 truths and 1 lie, revealing his identity completely, and even his hostility towards Odin was not hidden at all. After listening, Algorim naturally would not believe it easily, but after he went out to investigate, as long as he could match Loki's words, Loki would be able to gain his trust. And this is also the highest realm of lies, using the truth to deceive people, worthy of Loki's identity as the god of lies. Just when Loki and the others were calculating the Dark Elves, at this moment in the universe, the Dark Elves were getting closer and closer to Asgard. Asgard can be seen from afar on the huge spaceship. Chapter 138. Old man, are you dying? When the Dark Elves spaceship approached Asgard, Algorim in the dungeon of Asgard immediately received a signal. This is the contact method of the Dark Elves, which can transmit short messages across the galaxy. Suddenly, Algorim, who had been sitting cross-legged on the ground, suddenly showed a hint of joy on his face. In the cell next to him, Loki looked at his expression, and a trace of suspicion flashed in his eyes. What does this guy want to do? As soon as this thought emerged in his mind, Algorim's body suddenly changed. An aura that made Loki dread emanated from him, and his body visibly squirmed. Soon, pieces of black armor appeared on the surface of his body, and 2 sharp horns grew directly on his head. Looking at his changes, Loki's eyes suddenly became solemn. This guy really has a backup plan. Loki had found it strange before. How could the Dark Elves suddenly appear in the range of the gods after disappearing for thousands of years? Now it seems that they should be well prepared. Just as Loki was thinking, suddenly, a clear click sound came from Algorim's body. The seal that Heimdall had set in his body was broken. Suddenly, a dark breath gushed out of his body. Under the impact of this momentum, Loki took several steps back. At this time, Algorim also opened his eyes, turned his head to look at him, grinned, and his sharp white teeth flashed with a cold edge, which made Loki's eyes flash. The king's army is coming, and we should prepare for the welcoming ceremony. Since you are the prince of the god's realm, you should know where the protection shield of the god's realm is. Algorim looked at Loki with a dim look. Loki was sure that, if he said he didn't know, this guy would definitely kill him on the spot. Therefore, without hesitation, Loki nodded directly. I know, but are you sure you want to act now? I'm not underestimating you. Although your current strength is good, the power of the god's domain is definitely not weak. If no one is holding us back, we can't enter the core area at all. Listening to Loki's reminder, Algorim smiled. Don't worry, I won't be impulsive. In 3 hours, it will be the day when the celestial bodies gather, and the king's army will also come at that time. That's when we will act. Just make your arrangements. Loki nodded. Algorim suddenly raised his hand and broke open Loki's cell. Before that, I will help you break the seal first, Algorim said enthusiastically, and those who didn't know would think that Loki was really one of them. In fact, this was another test of his. If Loki approached him deliberately, he should not have been sealed with divine power. Looking at his actions, Loki instantly understood his plan and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Heimdall did not intend to put a seal on him before. However, Loki was cautious enough to play a full role and let him put on the seal. Therefore, facing Algorim's temptation, Loki was not afraid at all. He nodded and thanked him, saying, "Then I'll trouble you." As he spoke, Algorim's hand had already fallen on him, and a force emitting a dark aura suddenly poured into Loki's body and touched the seal. At that moment, the two forces collided in Loki's body, and Loki uttered a muffled groan. Seeing this, Algorim, who was originally ready to kill him at any time, immediately put down his worries and began to help Loki break the seal with all his strength. After fusing the cursed stone, he has successfully evolved into a cursed warrior, and his strength is several times stronger than before. Although the seal set by Heimdall is powerful, it is obviously not enough to face the current Algorim. As time passed, finally, the seal in Loki's body was directly broken, and a strong aura emanated from him. In the starry sky outside Asgard, a huge shadow approached and covered the entire starry sky. At the reception temple, the guards looked at the approaching spaceships, and their faces changed. "Master Guardian, enemy attack," a guard shouted loudly. Heimdall looked at the starry sky without saying a word, and his face became solemn in an instant. "Close the rainbow bridge," Heimdall ordered decisively. Yes. Many guards responded one after another, and they all stimulated the divine power in their bodies to close the rainbow bridge. Suddenly, the rainbow bridge that originally connected to the unknown land slowly closed. Soon, Asgard was completely isolated from the outside world. On the spaceship, Malekith looked at Asgard, which was so close, and a cold smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "After 5,000 years, I'm finally back. This time, I must take back everything I lost," Malekith muttered to himself, and at this time, a dark elf came behind him. "King, everything is ready. Okay, wait for the border to be in chaos and launch an attack immediately." "Yes." The dark elf responded, retreated silently, and waited for the final moment to come. In the Golden Palace, Odin sat on the throne, looking up at the sky. His eyes penetrated many obstacles and fell into the universe. Looking at the huge space fleet outside Asgard, his eyes became deep. Soon, Odin retracted his gaze and turned to look at the palace where Tony was, and a sigh came out of his mouth. He didn't know whether Tony could help the gods' realm resist the revenge of the Dark Elves. If Tony failed, he could only fight in person despite his injuries. However, if something unexpected happened to him, thinking of this, Odin looked down at his feet. His eyes penetrated the earth and fell on the deepest part of the gods' realm, where countless armies of the undead were sleeping. Compared with the Dark Elves, that was the real big trouble. "It's really a troubled time," Odin said tiredly, and at this moment, a female voice suddenly sounded in the Golden Palace. "Old man, what's wrong? Are you going to die? Your power is getting weaker and weaker. You can't seal me anymore. I'm about to get out of trouble. Hela, go back," Odin shouted, and the fatigue on his face was swept away, and his face was full of majesty again. At this moment, he became the king of gods standing at the top of the universe again. "Ha ha ha, old man, how long can you hold on? It's almost time. When I get out of hell, I will definitely destroy everything you are guarding. Everything you have now should be mine. It should be mine." Hela's triumphant laughter echoed, and then gradually disappeared in the Golden Palace. Suppressing Hela again, Odin cleared his mind of distracting thoughts, and the divine power in his body surged. The next second, his figure turned into a huge figure, overlooking the entire floating continent and Asgard below. "Subjects, darkness is about to fall again. Take up your weapons and defend our home together. I'm with you." Chapter 139 The Awakening of the Gods. Odin's voice continued to echo, quickly spreading throughout Asgard. Suddenly, Countless creatures picked up their weapons and prepared to rush to the battlefield, and the sleeping gods woke up from their slumber. In a vast primeval forest, a wave of waves rippled from the depths of the forest, and countless tree crowns fell into the depths of the forest, worshipping a great existence. Soon, a man with a grass ring on his head and his upper body exposed walked out of the depths of the forest step by step. Wherever he passed, the flowers, plants, and trees all bowed their heads. He is the god of the forest, Vidiel. In the abyss of the northern region of Asgard, a man holding a divine spear and wearing armor stepped out of the abyss step by step. The terrifying divine power wave rippled from him, and when he appeared, the land below fell into darkness. He is the god of darkness, Hodder. Hodder, who was walking in the air, went towards the direction of the Asgard. Suddenly, his steps stopped, and he turned to look to the east. A dazzling white light filled his sight, causing him to snort coldly. In the east, in the city of light, Balder woke up from his deep sleep. He also cast his gaze towards the north in a white robe, with a warm smile on his lips. Hoddle, long time no see. His tone was very light, but as soon as the words came out, they reached Hoddle's ears. I don't want to see you, disgusting light. Hoddle said unceremoniously, and then ignored Balder, and continued to go to Asgard. Listening to his words, Balder, who was still in the city of light, was not angry. As twin brothers, the two had been displeased for many years. It would be strange if Hoddle became polite. One by one, the gods woke up at the call of Odin, and they walked out of their sleeping places and gathered towards Asgard. The god of Warty, the god of truth and justice Vaseti, the god of poetry Bragi, the goddess of youth Idun, and so on. The gathering of many gods filled the entire Asgard with a strong and terrifying atmosphere. As the gods gathered, the gathering of celestial bodies that lasted for 5,000 years finally began. Outside Asgard, the originally unbreakable border suddenly became violently turbulent. Waves of cosmic storms continued to sweep across the starry sky. The terrifying laws intertwined and emerged, and gradually became chaotic. Soon, Asgard's originally perfect defense became a vacuum. On the spaceship, Malekith's eyes flashed with divine light. Looking at this scene, the corners of his mouth suddenly rose. The next second, his voice spread directly throughout the entire space fleet. The time has come, my people. Our chance for revenge has come. Everyone, listen to my orders. Take back our territory. Take back our honor. Kill. Malekith gave an order, and suddenly, countless spaceships flew out of their huge fleet and rushed straight to Asgard. At the border, the Asgardian warriors who had been prepared long ago looked at the dense spaceships in the vast starry sky and immediately launched laser-heavy artillery at the commander's order. Thousands of lasers shot out from Asgard, and the originally dark universe was directly pierced by countless lasers. Boom. 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 Explosions sounded one after another. Since the vacuum cannot transmit sound, everyone could not hear the explosions. However, they could see the bright fireworks blooming in the universe. Just as the Asgardian warriors launched their attack, the Dark Elves driving the spacecraft were also unwilling to be outdone, and quickly opened fire to counterattack. The Star Destroyer was fired directly, and fell into the defense line of the EC. Then, a series of violent explosions sounded, and a large number of Asgardian warriors were engulfed by the artillery fire. The terrifying flames directly ignited the entire border. In Asgard, a palace, Tony pushed open the palace door and walked out, looking up at the sky. The originally azure sky was now completely dyed red. Every moment, Tony could see bursts of red light flashing in the sky. He knew that it was the flames of the explosion. Compared with the war scenes of humans, the battle between the Aesir and the Dark Elves was simply an epic battle scene. Even though he had not been to the battlefield in person, this magnificent battle still made Tony excited. In the dungeon of Asgard, when the Dark Elves launched the attack, Algorim stood up immediately. The time has come. It's time for us to act. After saying that, Loki stood up without saying a word, and the two of them walked out of the dungeon violently and headed for the outside world. At this moment, in the outside Asgard, many gods who had gathered before rushed to the battlefield, and a large number of Asgard warriors were also transferred to guard the border, so the Asgard now looked very deserted. After leaving the dungeon, Loki took the initiative to act as a guide, perfectly demonstrating what a traitor is. Under his leadership, the two successfully passed through many obstacles and walked towards the installation site of the protection device. At the same time, in the installation site of the protection device, the Asgard warriors guarding there received an order from the front line. Activate the protection shield. After receiving the order, the Asgard warriors did not dare to delay and quickly activated the protection device. Suddenly, on the battlefield, many spaceships that were about to break into Asgard were suddenly blocked by a transparent light shield. Seeing this, many dark elves who were originally happy turned pale. Because this protective shield was also a legacy left by the dark elves, specially prepared for the day of celestial borders gathering. As long as the protective shield is turned on, unless it can be broken in an instant, otherwise, the defensive power of the protective shield is enough to completely block all enemies from Asgard. This was originally their weapon to defend against enemies, but now it has become their trouble. On the spaceship, Malekith, who had been paying attention to the situation on the battlefield, saw the protective shield rise, and his face also became gloomy. Fortunately, he had already expected this scene and let Algorym lurk in. Now he just hoped that he would not let himself down. At the same time, Loki led Algorym to the depths of Asgard, where the protective device was stored. As soon as the two appeared, they were immediately discovered by the Asgardian warriors guarding there. "Who are you?" A loud shout sounded, and the Asgardian warriors looked at Loki and the others with vigilance. But before they could see the two men clearly, a black shadow blocked their sight. The next second, Algorym appeared in front of them, and his two sharp claws fell directly on their heads. Algorym exerted force on his hands, and the heads of the two Asgardian warriors were directly broken like watermelons. After dealing with the two men, Algorym couldn't wait to walk in, and the protective shield device appeared directly in front of him. Seeing this scene, Algorym was overjoyed. "Well, you did a good job." Chapter 140, Battle Escalation. Algorym praised excitedly, and then the dark power gathered in his palm. The next second, it whistled directly towards the protective device. Boom. Without any surprise, the energy ball hit the protective device of the god's domain fiercely. The violent explosion instantly destroyed everything. On the border battlefield, the Asgard warriors originally relied on the protective shield to suppress the dark elves, and were able to attack freely. But suddenly, the originally stable protective shield suddenly showed a violent fluctuation, flashing continuously as if it was short-circuited. In a short moment, the protective shield was completely extinguished. Seeing this, many Asgard warriors were instantly terrified. "No, the protective shield is ineffective." Screams sounded on the battlefield, and panic gradually spread among the Asgard warriors. On the contrary, the Dark Elves were overjoyed when they saw this scene. At this moment, the voices of their commanders came to the ears of all the Dark Elves. "The tortoise shell of the god's domain is broken. Everyone, attack with all your strength." Yes. Many Dark Elves responded one after another, and then drove the spaceship to the battlefield with a grim smile on their faces. Boom. 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 The war spread rapidly to the god's domain. The Asgardian warriors, who could rely on the protective shield to calmly resist the Dark Elves, were suddenly faced with a fierce fight. The giant artillery defense line arranged by the Asgardian warriors kept firing, and beams of light rushed into the universe and penetrated the spaceships. But more spaceships broke through the defense line and kept firing star destroyers, destroying a large number of Asgardian warriors. In addition, the Dark Elf spaceships were able to be invisible, making it even more difficult for heavy artillery to aim. For a time, the Asgardian warriors suffered heavy losses. At this moment, the entire border battlefield has completely become a meat grinder. It is like a man-eating demon, devouring all life. Every minute and every second, a large number of lives fall on this land soaked in blood. The ruthlessness of war is vividly reflected at this moment. Seeing that the Asgardian defense line is in danger, it will be completely overwhelmed by the Dark Elf army at any time. At this moment, a chant resounded throughout the battlefield. "Life from nature, obey my call and heal all injured creatures." A naked upper body man wearing a grass ring appeared above the border battlefield. The powerful divine power in his body continued to surge, and behind him, countless green light spots gathered from behind, forming a tide of life in an instant, covering all the Asgard warriors. Under the cover of the tide of life, the Asgard warriors who were originally exhausted or seriously injured seemed to return to their mother's arms, surrounded by a wave of warmth. In an instant, all the Asgard warriors were exhausted, and their injuries were all gone. Seeing this scene, many Asgard warriors were overjoyed, and they looked up at the sky in surprise. It's Lord Vidiel. Lord Vidiel has taken action. Praise nature, praise all things in the forest. The Asgard warriors kept cheering, and the originally precarious defense line was instantly stabilized at this moment. The help from the gods made them instantly full of confidence in the war. And this is just the beginning. With the appearance of Vidiel, many gods in the divine domain took action. The dark god Hodder, Balder, the god of light, Slud, the goddess of strength, Allah, the god of hunting. The gods descended, the divine light shone, and all darkness was dispelled under the divine light. The dark elves, who had originally had the upper hand, were caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the gods, and suffered heavy losses. On the space fleet, Malekith, sitting on the throne, had been watching the battlefield. When he saw his army being repelled by the gods, Malekith's face suddenly darkened. Damn it. When I take over the divine domain, I will kill you. Malekith cursed angrily, but he was not panicked except for being angry. Although the gods are powerful, the dark elves are not vegetarians either. Naturally, there are a large number of strong people who can rival the gods. Come here. Malekith's voice rang out in the hall. A dark elf suddenly walked in from outside the hall. My king, wake up the sleeping strong men. It's time for them to appear. Yes, my king. The dark elf took the order and left. Soon, in the sleeping place of the spaceship, the dormant chambers were opened one by one, and the strong men of the dark elves slowly opened their eyes. Their bodies were shriveled and scary, and all of them wore black robes, which was completely different from ordinary dark elves. They were the high-end combat power of the dark elves, wizards. By studying various forbidden techniques, they gained power comparable to that of gods. Has the war started? An old wizard said hoarsely. Perhaps because they had been sleeping for too long, they had become a little unsound in their speech. Hearing this, the dark elves who woke them up immediately bowed their heads and said respectfully, "Dear priests, the battle has begun. The king has ordered to kill all the gods. We know, we have finally waited for this day. Good guys, let's go and meet those guys who claim to be gods to see if they can stop our forbidden techniques. Okay, let's go together." The priests of the dark elves smiled and said, there was no fear in their eyes, and some of them even had some eagerness in their eyes. Years of slumber not only did not wipe out their fighting desire, but even made it stronger. On the battlefield, not long after many gods killed the dark elves, chants resounded throughout the battlefield. The priests of the dark elves walked from the spaceship, and terrifying power emanated from their shriveled bodies. Frost, fire, lightning, storm, and forbidden techniques bloomed in their hands. Suddenly, all the gods were shrouded by many forbidden techniques. The battle escalated again. Seeing this, the faces of the gods of the EC became solemn, but they naturally would not sit and wait for death, and began to fight back. Various abilities burst out from their hands, and they did not give in to the priests of the dark elves. The most dazzling among them were the twin brothers Hodder and Balder. It was not that they were the strongest, but that light and darkness were extremely powerful abilities, no matter in which world. So, when they took action, they immediately attracted most of the attention. As the battle on the border battlefield became more and more intense, Loki and his companions also walked out of the storage place of the protective device in Asgard. Since Loki helped to complete the task, Algorim almost let down all his guard against him. After clearly realizing this, Loki's mind moved, knowing that the opportunity he had been waiting for a long time had come. He pretended to ask casually, what should we do next? Chapter 141 I'm afraid of accidentally beating him to death. Loki asked casually. Hearing this, Algorim did not hide it and said directly, go find the holy object of my dark elves, the other particle. When my dark elves retreated, the holy object was left in the divine realm. I don't know where it was sealed by Odin. So, let's ask someone first. Hearing this, Loki's calm heart was stirred a little, and then pretended not to care and said, oh, the other particle, I think I know where it is. After saying this, Algorim, who was originally walking outside, stopped his steps, and looked at Loki excitedly. You know, where is it? Tell me quickly. He looked at Loki excitedly, his tone full of excitement. As the saying goes, you can find it without any effort, after searching for it everywhere. Although he had never heard of this sentence, his mood now is exactly the same as what this sentence describes. Looking at his appearance, Loki's eyes flashed with a smile. Things are going better than he thought. Whether it was revealing the location of the protective device or actively asking him about his next purpose, everything was in Loki's calculation. Revealing the location was to gain trust and guide him to tell his purpose. He then provided clues to make him think that he was in charge of everything. In this way, he could avoid being suspected to the greatest extent. Otherwise, if Loki brought it up, it would inevitably raise his vigilance that he had just put down. At that time, it might affect the things that happened later. It must be said that Loki was also very worried about helping Thor. Don't worry, as far as I know, the other particles broke the seal not long ago and merged into the body of a mortal. After saying that, Algorim quickly asked, where is that mortal? In the god's domain. However, I heard that Odin tried every way to remove the other particles in her body but failed. Even if I tell you, can you take it out? Loki pretended to be skeptical. This was his first attempt. Although the other particles were the sacred objects of the Dark Elves, they must know more about the other particles than Odin and others. But whether they can extract the other particles is all their own guess, and no one knows whether they can do it. So, if there is a chance, Loki naturally doesn't mind trying it out. If they can't take it out, then the next plan will not be a waste of effort. Seeing that Loki actually questioned them, Algorithm smiled proudly. The other particles are the sacred objects of my dark plan, and we can naturally take it out. As for Odin, I admit that he is quite powerful, but it is impossible for him to activate the sacred objects of my dark plan. Looking at Algorithm with a proud face, Loki was delighted. However, he did not give up the test, but continued. Oh, what is the method? Don't tell me that it is killing people to get treasures. If it is this method, then there is no need to say it. Loki said with disdain. That's right, there is a way to take out the other particles, that is to kill Jane directly. Without a host, the other particles will naturally condense again. He was afraid that the Dark Elves would also use this method, then he would have worked in vain. Hearing the disdain in Loki's words, Algorim became anxious, or rather, Loki's words violated their area of pride. At that moment, Algorim said with an unhappy face, how could you use that method? Forcibly taking treasures will pollute the holy objects. Whoever dares to blaspheme the holy objects will be the mortal enemy of my Dark Elves, and we will fight to the death. Seeing Algorim's big reaction, Loki was instantly relieved, and the last trace of worry in his heart was gone. At that moment, Loki deliberately smiled and said, sorry, didn't I know that? Hearing this, Algorim was unwilling to continue to care about it. For him, finding the holy objects was the most critical thing at the moment. Stop talking nonsense, tell me quickly, where is that mortal? Follow me, it's not far from here. Loki smiled and stepped forward to lead the way. The two of them walked one after the other and soon arrived at Thor's palace. At this moment, there was no one in the palace, except Jane and Tony. Thor had already gone to the border battlefield. And this was also part of their plan, allowing Loki to take Jane away. As the two stepped into the palace, Tony noticed it at the first time, and opened his eyes immediately. The majestic mental power instantly penetrated his body, and enveloped the entire palace. Looking at Loki, who acted as a guide, Tony's words suddenly rang in his mind. Loki, how is your plan going? Hearing the sudden voice, Loki, who was walking in front, changed his face, but fortunately he quickly regained his composure, and was not noticed. At that moment, Loki continued to lead the way with an expressionless face, and replied with mental power, it's almost there, it's almost there. As long as this guy takes Jane to the Dark Elves, and has someone take out the other particles, it will be fine. Hearing this, Tony's mouth curled up into a smile, and urged, then you better hurry up. The other particles are the holy objects of the Dark Elves. The only one who can take out the holy objects is probably the Dark Elf King. If you are slow, the Dark Elf King might take action. Once he takes action, I won't be able to watch. If I accidentally kill him, then this last hope will be gone. Hearing this, Loki's heart suddenly shuddered. In the eyes of others, Tony might be suspected of bragging. What do you mean you accidentally killed someone with one move? That's the king of the Dark Elves, not some cat or dog. How can it be so easy to die? But Loki has seen all kinds of magical things about Tony and his unfathomable strength, so he believes that what Tony said is true. If Malekith is really killed by Tony, then he will really vomit blood. At the moment, he used his mental power to reply that he knew, and Loki's speed under his feet could not help but speed up a few points. And Tony continued to close his eyes and rest after reminding him. In the face of the war, he naturally had to adjust his state to the peak. Soon, Loki and the others came to the palace where Jean was. Without waiting for Algorim to take action, Loki stepped into the palace, took the initiative to knock Jane unconscious, and put her into a temporary space. This space was temporarily constructed by him using the cosmic cube, which was just enough to store one person. After finishing all this, Loki and the others did not stay in Asgard any longer. They went directly to the border battlefield. Loki wanted to quickly solve the problem in the body, so as not to delay and cause any changes. Algorithm did not want to continue to cause trouble, and everything was based on the holy objects. On this point, the two showed amazing tacit understanding. Chapter 142 Crossing the Battlefield. Loki and his companions were both strong, and they hurried to the border battlefield. Now the only passage to the god's domain, the Rainbow Bridge, had been closed, and the only way out was through the border battlefield. Although Loki knew a small path to leave the god's domain, that path led directly to the Blue Star, and was not suitable for entry and exit. Moreover, Loki did not want to expose that path to Algorim. Looking at the battlefield full of war and the gods and dark elf priests who were constantly fighting in the sky, Loki swallowed his saliva subconsciously and said in a dry voice, "How do we leave?" He was not pretending to be like this, but he really felt a little scalp tingling. With so many strong men fighting, even if he thought he was strong, he had no confidence to pass through them. He even doubted whether he would be targeted by the gods if he appeared on the battlefield now. After all, not many people knew about his and Thor's plan, and at most there would not be more than a handful of people, and his relationship with the gods of the EC was not very good. Loki was really afraid of these guys. If they saw him and Algorim together, they would suddenly give him a hard blow. He would not be able to bear it. Seeing Loki looking at him, Algorim also had a headache. According to the plan he and Malekith had discussed, he was the insider who sabotaged and helped the Dark Elves to invade Asgard, and there was no arrangement for support. But now, the sudden appearance of the Ether Particles completely disrupted his plan. He had to send the Ether Particles out as soon as possible, but no one was there to help. So looking at the scene in front of him, he didn't have much to do. How about we find a place to wait and delay? Maybe in a while, Asgard's defense line will be breached, and we don't have to go out. Algorim suggested. Hearing this, Loki was anxious, and Tony's reminder just now was still echoing in his ears. But no matter how anxious he was, he knew that he must not show it at this time. Otherwise, once he was suspected, all his efforts might be wasted. So, Loki nodded and said, "I don't care. Since you said to wait, then let's wait. It's just that Odin can't help but pay attention to the ether particles. Now that we have taken the people away, we don't know when Odin will find out," Loki said with a pretended sorrow. Algorim's face changed instantly. He really hadn't thought about this just now. Now that Loki said it, he immediately reacted. Indeed, he and others are in great danger now. Odin can't be unaware that the mortals who have merged with the ether particles have been taken away by them. The difference is just a matter of speed. At that time, if the Dark Elves fail to break through the defense line of the EC and Odin reacts again, his life will be in danger. Moreover, the ether particles that have just been found can easily be snatched back by Odin. It is basically impossible to snatch them back at that time. Thinking of this, Algorim, who originally suggested waiting, instantly changed his face. "No, we can't wait. We must find a way out and get back to the ship immediately." Looking at Algorim, who changed his attitude faster than turning a page, Loki's eyes flashed with a hint of mockery. "In that case, then you should find a way quickly. I can't help you with this matter." Loki spread his hands, indicating that he could not help. Algorim did not doubt him. After all, Loki had said before that he did not get along with the gods of the Azura realm. Standing there thinking for a long time, looking at the battlefield that was like a meat grinder, Algorim finally gritted his teeth and decided, there is no better way, just force it. Later, I will be your shield. You just keep your head down and rush forward. As long as we get back to the ship, we will be safe. Hearing his decision, Loki's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. He didn't expect that this guy would actually use his life to exchange for his life. Although he knew that he was more for the other particles, it was not bad to be able to do this. However, although he was surprised, he would not persuade him. He was not really joining the Dark Elves, so he did not care about the life or death of this guy. So, after he finished speaking, Loki nodded without hesitation. Okay, let's do as you say. The two reached a consensus and took action quickly. First, they approached the border battlefield quietly until they were discovered by the Asgard warriors. Algorim suddenly shouted, "Charge out!" After saying that, a dark divine power was released from him, forming a dark protective shield that enveloped the two of them. Suddenly, the two figures were like lightning, quickly rushed out of the blockade of the Asgard warriors and rushed into the starry sky. In the starry sky, the battle of the gods continued, and powerful forbidden techniques and magical powers exploded in the universe, and the terrifying aftermath swept across the starry sky. The two people who rushed out of Asgard were immediately submerged by the aftermath of the battle between the gods, and the terrifying impact force continued to fall on Algorim. Suddenly, a mouthful of black blood spit out from his mouth. The originally stable protective shield flickered at this moment, which made Loki shudder. Don't let this guy be so weak and be taken away by a wave directly, otherwise, he will die unjustly. Fortunately, what he was worried about did not happen. Algorim, who had merged with the Cursed Stone and transformed into a Cursed Warrior, was quite strong. He withstood the impact of the mighty aftermath and continued to fly towards the spaceship. At this time, the gods who were fighting also discovered the two. The divine light flashed in their pupils, and they saw Loki directly. Suddenly, the faces of the gods changed one after another. The irritable god of war T suddenly burst into a loud shout, "Loki, you dare to betray the realm of God." After that, T left his opponent and flew towards the two, intending to stop them. Seeing this, Algorim's soul was scared. If they were stopped at this time, they would really die. Then, he looked at Loki on the side with a resentful face. Although he believed Loki and knew that what he said was true, he didn't expect that Loki's popularity was so bad. He attracted the hatred of a god as soon as he showed up. It was really unlucky. Fortunately, he saw the dark elf priest fighting with the gods at this time. Algorim quickly shouted, "Stop him and cover us." As he said that, Algorim's body quickly burst out with the exclusive aura of the Dark Elves, indicating his identity. Seeing this, the Dark Elf priests reacted one after another, and his previous opponent stopped her at the first time, to prevent him from getting close. Although they didn't recognize Algorim, who looked so different, they could feel the pure Dark Elf aura he exuded. He actually took a huge risk to cross the battlefield and return to the spaceship at this time. There must be something important, so they couldn't sit idly by. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143, Separation of Ether Particles. As many Dark Elf priests took action, the situation on the battlefield changed again. The two forces launched a new round of battle around Loki and the other two. Feeling the constant terrifying atmosphere around them, Loki and the other two looked ugly. Fortunately, under the cover of the Dark Elf priests, they finally passed through the battlefield and escaped from danger. On the spaceship, when the two fell, Algorim breathed a sigh of relief and looked back at the battlefield behind him. There was still a trace of fear on his face. At this time, two Dark Elf warriors came up. "See you, sir." Hearing the voice, Algorim immediately turned around, looked at the two people and coughed lightly. The fear on his face disappeared, replaced by a face of majesty. "Where is the king?" "My lord, the king is in the meeting hall," a warrior answered. Algorim nodded. Take me to see the king. Yes. After the words fell, the two dark elf warriors led the way in front, and Loki and the other two followed behind them, and walked towards the meeting hall. On the way, Loki kept looking around. Seeing the strict guards and the dark atmosphere, he couldn't help but become nervous. He had practiced 99 times, and now he was just one step away from the last one. The more he was at this time, the more pressure Loki was under. Especially after entering the meeting hall, Loki's nervousness reached its peak. Fortunately, Loki's psychological quality was okay. Although he was nervous, his face did not show any abnormality. He even showed a relaxed look, giving people a feeling of joy. Finally, a figure sitting high on the throne appeared in front of Loki. Just as Loki was looking at him, Algorim immediately knelt on one knee and said, "King, I'm back." As soon as he finished speaking, Malekith on the throne opened his eyes immediately, and a divine light flashed in his eyes. He looked down at Loki and others from a high place and said in a leisurely tone, "Why are you back?" Malekith's tone was very calm, but it instantly brought great pressure to people. Cold sweat immediately broke out on Algorith's forehead, and he quickly explained, "King, I came back early because I found the holy relic of our dark elves. I was afraid of accidents, so I disobeyed orders and came back early." As soon as these words came out, a ray of terrifying aura instantly spread from Malekith's body. He originally had a calm expression, but now his eyes directly emitted a terrifying light. "Where is the holy relic?" Malekith suppressed his inner surprise and said. Although he acted very calmly, everyone could hear the joy in his words. Hearing this, Algorith did not speak, but turned his head to look at Loki and gestured to him. Malekith, who had been staring at him, immediately noticed his little move and immediately turned his eyes to Loki. "Who is he?" "My king. He is the god Loki who I instigated to rebel in the god's domain. This time, I was able to successfully complete the task and find the holy object, all thanks to his help." "Oh." Malekith raised a playful smile at the corner of his mouth, looking at Loki with a sharp gaze. "I see, you did a good job. Now, take out the holy object first." "Yes, my king." Algorim responded, and then looked at Loki and urged, "Don't stand there." After speaking, Loki nodded, and immediately waved his hand and released Jane. The moment Jane appeared, Malekith's eyes were immediately attracted to her. Don't get me wrong, he just felt a familiar breath on Jane. At the same time, Algorim's explanation also sounded at this moment. "King, the holy object broke the seal not long ago and merged into the body of this mortal. I need to trouble you to take the holy object out of her body." Hearing this, a burst of laughter suddenly rang out in the hall. After confirming that the holy object was indeed in Jane's body, Malekith could no longer suppress the joy in his heart. Okay, I know, Gorim did a good job. If we win this battle, you should be the first to contribute. Your Majesty, you are too kind. Algorim said modestly. Malekith ignored him, but looked at Loki again and praised him. Don't worry, my dark elves will not treat anyone unfairly. Since you have joined my clan and have made such a great contribution, I can agree to one of your requests. Thank you, Elf King. I don't have too many requests. I just hope that, after taking out the holy object, the Elf King can give me this mortal in front of me. Oh, what do you want a mortal for? Malekith asked curiously, and Loki's heart instantly became nervous. Although Malekith seemed to be very easy to talk to, Loki could feel that this guy did not trust him. So his next answer was crucial. If he aroused his suspicion, it would not be so easy for him and Jane to get out of here today. Realizing this, Loki became more cautious and went over the prepared words in his mind several times. After confirming that there were no problems, he slowly spoke. This woman is the son of Odin and the lover of Thor. Although she is just a mortal, Thor values her very much. To be honest with you, Your Excellency the Elf King, Thor and I are incompatible. If I had her in my hands, Thor will definitely let me control him. After saying this, Loki stood there respectfully waiting for Malekith's response. Malekith did not answer him immediately, but glanced at Algorim to confirm the truth. He believed that, since Algorim dared to bring Loki to see him, he must have investigated Loki's background. Then he could naturally distinguish the truth from the falsehood in Loki's words. Seeing Malekith's gaze, Algorim understood instantly and nodded slowly. Seeing this, Malekith's doubts were completely dispelled, and he smiled and said, I thought it was something else. Just immortal. Since you want it, I'll give it to you. Thank you, Your Excellency the Elf King. Loki showed a trace of gratitude on his face. Malekith did not continue to waste time on him, and his eyes turned to Jane again, his eyes full of expectation. Bang! A burst of black light fell on Jane as Malekith waved his hand. Suddenly, the unconscious Jane groaned, and the next second, her body floated up. Seeing this, Malekith's face suddenly became solemn, and a loud shout came out of his mouth. Separate. As the voice fell, red particles separated from Jane's body and gradually gathered together. In this way, the other particles that made Odin helpless were now easily extracted from Jane's body by Malekith. Chapter 144 Tony's backup plan. The process of extracting the other particles went smoothly. In just half an hour, Malekith completely stripped the other particles from Jane's body. Looking at the dark red particles gathered in his hands, Malekith's mouth raised in amazing arc, and his eyes were completely attracted by the dark red color emitted by the other particles, as if there were rare treasures inside. Looking at this scene, Loki forcibly suppressed the urge to snatch back the other particles in his heart, and quickly stepped forward to check on Jane's condition. After a careful observation, he found that Jane was nothing else except pale and weak. His heart, which had been hanging in his heart, was completely put back into his stomach. Looking at her who was still unconscious, Loki did not wake her up, but just raised his hand and waved, and took him back into the space again. Then he looked at Malekith who was still immersed in the other particles on the throne and said, Your Excellency the Elf King, if there is nothing else, then I will withdraw first. Hearing this, Malekith waved his hand without looking back. At this moment, he no longer cared about anything else. The joy of getting the other particles was enough to make him ignore everything. Turning to leave the hall, Loki, led by two dark elves, came to the residence arranged for him. After sending the dark elves away, Loki did not hesitate, and quickly cut his wrist. Blood immediately flowed out of his wrist, and formed a mirror. This was the way Loki and Thor had agreed on to communicate. Using his own divine blood to communicate, there would be no problem of magic fluctuations, and he could hide himself to the greatest extent. Soon, Thor's figure appeared in the blood-colored mirror. Looking at Loki, Thor on the other side of the mirror said excitedly, Loki, how is it going? Success. Jane is safe and sound. We can start the action. Also, tell Tony to be careful. Malekith has obtained the other particles. I always feel that thing is not simple. Great, don't worry, I know, I will remind Tony. The two did not talk for too long, and soon, the communication was disconnected. At the same time, in the meeting hall, Algorim looked at Malekith curiously and asked, King, what effect does the holy object have? Although he is also a strong man of the Dark Elves, he will not know the specific effect of the other particles, unless he sits on the throne. Hearing this, Malekith, who was immersed in the other particles, finally came back to his senses, and said with a smile on his face, the power of the other particles is unimaginable to the world. The most intuitive point is that the cursed stone is made of other particles. With the other particles, I can continuously make cursed stones, and create the cursed army again. Hearing this, Algorim's face was full of shock. He has personally experienced the effect of the cursed stone, which has increased his strength by more than twice. Now, the cursed stone can be mass-produced. Imagine an army composed of strong men. Such a scene, just imagining it makes people tremble all over. Congratulations, my king. This time we will definitely be able to recapture the divine domain and destroy the EC. Algorim said excitedly. Malekith nodded in agreement, and then said, go, select an elite group. I want to personally build an invincible army. Yes. Algorim responded, turned and walked out of the hall. Looking at his departing back, the smile on Malekith's lips disappeared, and his face gradually became calm. Creating the cursed stone is just a trivial ability of the other particles. The real power of the other particles is that they can make people's wishes come true. Even if the other particles devour the 9 realms, then Malekith can make the entire universe fall into darkness in a moment. This is the most powerful part of the other particles, but he naturally won't tell Algorim such a secret. Looking at the battlefield outside, and the gods who were resisting, Malekith's mouth curled up a sneer. It's almost time. Your doomsday is coming. After devouring the god's realm, and then devouring the other 8 realms, who can stop me at that time? Malekith muttered to himself, unabashedly proclaiming his ambitions. If he had planned to stay in the god's domain before, now that he has retrieved the other particles, the god's domain has no need to exist. His goal is the entire universe. Asgard, the palace where Tony is. The door slowly opened, and Tony walked out of it. In order to leave time for Loki and others, he had not taken action before, and he didn't even go to the border battlefield. Just now, he had received a message from Thor that Jane was successfully rescued, and there was no need to delay any longer. Therefore, Tony walked out of the palace, flew directly away from Asgard, and rushed to the border battlefield. The power of controlling gravity plus the rabbit spell made his speed reach the extreme in an instant, and a sonic boom sounded over Asgard. Tony's figure was like lightning, instantly cutting through the sky, and when he appeared again, he had arrived at the border battlefield. Looking at the starry sky, watching this epic battle, Tony felt like watching a 3D blockbuster in his previous life, and it was even more exciting than a 3D blockbuster. At this moment, a figure flew back from the front line and came in the direction of Tony. "Hey, Tony." Thor, holding Thor's hammer, appeared in front of Tony with a smile on his face and a strong smell of blood on his body. "Why are you back?" Tony asked in confusion. Hearing this, Thor quickly said, "Loki asked me to remind you. Malekith has obtained the ether. That thing seems to be not simple. I asked you to be careful." "Really? I see." Tony nodded calmly. It's not that he didn't take Loki's reminder to heart, but he had long known the power of the ether and had been prepared for it. There are 6 infinite gems in the universe, and the ether is one of them, the reality gem. It has the ability to make people's wishes come true. In a sense, it is the strongest treasure in the universe, a bug-level treasure. But there is no invincible thing in the world. Although the power of the reality gem is powerful, before it devours the 9 realms, its power is not stronger than other gems, and it is even a little weaker. In addition, the consumption of using the reality gem far exceeds the consumption of using other gems, so Tony is not worried that he can't do anything to the reality gem. Moreover, just in case, he had obtained the Mind Stone from Loki before. With the Mind Stone as a foundation, even if the Reality Stone was really more powerful than he imagined, he would not be without a way to fight back. Seeing Tony's calm face, Thor shrugged his shoulders and asked without saying anything, "When will you take action?" "When you force Malekith out." Chapter 145. I'm a substitute. Tony spoke in a calm tone. Hearing this, Thor was stunned for a moment and asked in confusion, "Why?" After he finished speaking, Tony looked at him calmly without saying anything. Thor also reacted suddenly and cursed himself for being stupid. The spaceship was Malekith's home field. Who knew what backup plan he had prepared inside? If Tony went in directly, he would lose his home advantage. If it was a weaker opponent, it would be fine. But is Malekith weak? Odin didn't even dare to say this, so facing such an enemy, he would naturally weaken him as much as possible. Ahem. Thor coughed lightly, scratched his head awkwardly and said, "Okay, leave it to me. I'll force him out now." After speaking, Thor turned and left. If he stayed here any longer, he always felt like a fool, so he slipped away. With a plan, Thor returned to the battlefield and quickly sent a message to the gods, asking them to go all out, even if both sides were injured. They must kill the army of the Dark Elves. He just didn't believe that Malekith could still sit still after the army was defeated. The gods listened to Thor's words, and although they hesitated, no one refuted. As the prince of the Aesir, Thor's orders were still somewhat effective, especially at this time. Unless someone wanted to be against the Aesir, no one would easily refute his orders. Suddenly, the offensive of the gods became more and more fierce. The Dark Elf priests, who could originally fight back and forth with the gods, began to fall into a disadvantage as the gods did not hesitate to exchange injuries for injuries. Soon, the Dark God Hodder killed his opponent with a serious injury. Immediately afterwards, the God of Light Boulder also killed his opponent. The outbreak of the two broke the deadlock on the battlefield and established an advantage for the gods. Although such an advantage is not very obvious, it is like a snowball. Once the advantage is established, the snowball rolls bigger and bigger, and finally forms an overwhelming advantage. Boom. 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 There were violent explosions. With the help of the two brothers Hoddle, more and more gods defeated their opponents. Strong gods like the god of war T destroyed their opponents on their own, further expanding the advantage of the gods. As priests continued to fall, the originally vigorous morale of the Dark Elves suffered a great blow. A chain reaction was completely triggered, forming a trend of defeat. Kill. Shouts resounded throughout the battlefield. Under the leadership of the gods, the Asgard warriors rushed into the battlefield and strangled the Dark Elves crazily. At this moment, the Dark Elves began to collapse. Countless Dark Elves fled to the spaceships with panic on their faces. At this moment, they no longer had the ambition they had at the beginning. Instead, they fled for their lives like dogs that had lost their homes. Seeing this, the gods of the divine domain would naturally not miss this good opportunity. They took advantage of the victory and pursued the spaceships. In the meeting hall, Malekith looked at the situation on the battlefield outside. His face was stunned. He didn't expect the situation to change so quickly. He was stunned for a while, and the situation on the battlefield collapsed. Can you believe it? After reacting, dark clouds covered his face, and his body stood up from the throne at this moment. Waste. Malekith cursed fiercely, took a step forward, and his figure disappeared in the hall. When he appeared again, he was already standing in front of the spaceship. The Dark Elves who were originally fleeing frantically stopped one after another when they saw Malekith standing in front of the spaceship and looked at their king with nervous faces. Even though the shouts of killing behind them were gradually approaching, all the Dark Elves did not dare to make any sound and looked up at Malekith with awe. His eyes swept over the bodies of many Dark Elves. He was originally going to get angry, but when he looked at their injuries, he stopped talking. When he finally spoke, they are all his subjects, fighting for him. Even if they are defeated and need to be punished, it should not be now. Thinking of this, Malekith calmed down, and with a wave of his hand, the dark power surged, sending them directly back to the spaceship, and instantly clearing the starry sky in front of them. The originally densely packed Dark Elves suddenly disappeared in front of him and others, and only a figure was looking down at them from above. Seeing this scene, the gods and many Asgard warriors could not help but stop. Thor looked at Malekith with a serious look, guessed his identity, and then Thor stepped out and shouted, "You are the king of the Dark Elves, Malekith? Your doomsday has come. Surrender." Thor directly persuaded him to surrender. Although he knew that he was probably doing useless work, he still wanted to try, just in case this guy really surrendered. But the facts proved that he thought too much. Malekith not only did not surrender, but even ignored him, but kept scanning the crowd, looking for something. Soon, he didn't see the person he wanted to see in the crowd, and his brows furrowed. "Where's Odin? Did he send you, a bunch of scumbags, to stop me?" As soon as these words came out, the gods were angry. Anyone who was called a scumbag would be angry, let alone a group of high and mighty gods. Arrogant. Looking for death. So arrogant. The god scolding continued, and the echoing voice made Malekith feel irritated. At that moment, his eyes turned cold, and the terrifying dark aura was released directly from him. The mighty pressure instantly fell on the gods and many Asgard warriors. The pressure fell, the gods' expressions changed drastically, and many Asgard warriors were directly crushed alive by Malekith's pressure. Bang, bang, bang. In an instant, groups of blood mist exploded directly in the starry sky, and in the blink of an eye, the universe was dyed red. At this moment, the entire battlefield was instantly silent. Everyone looked at Malekith in horror. The joy of defeating his opponent completely disappeared, replaced by deep fear. This guy was so strong that people could not even think of resisting. Malekith basically ignored the fear on everyone's face. At this moment, he was looking up in the direction of the god's domain. The vast sound spread directly in the vacuum environment of the universe and swept towards the god's domain. "Odin, we haven't seen each other for 5,000 years. Are you going to be a coward? Let these garbage die." The sound wave rolled towards the god's domain. Once it fell into the god's domain, not only would his words spread throughout the god's domain, but it would also bring great damage to the god's domain. However, just as the sound wave was about to enter the god's domain, a figure appeared at the border of the god's domain. and the indifferent voice also echoed in the universe. Odin can't come. Who are you? Malekith frowned at the figure who blocked his sound wave. Me. I guess I'm a substitute. Chapter 146 Borrowing a Gun. Tony smiled and said in a playful tone. Under the support of gravity, he walked towards Malekith step by step. Listening to his words, not only Malekith, but also the gods of the realm of gods couldn't help but twitch their mouths. Ghost substitute, do you think this is playing football, and you still need a substitute? The gods were madly complaining in their hearts, but no one spoke. Although they didn't know Tony dared to appear at this juncture. He must be extraordinary, and he might even be as strong as Odin. Therefore, the gods knew what was good and watched silently. Their silence disappointed Tony a little. He was still waiting for a show off and slap in the face. After all, a traverser who doesn't show off and slap in the face is not a good traverser. But he met a group of smart people who didn't give him this opportunity at all. For a while, Tony couldn't help but sigh helplessly. At this moment, a cold snort spread throughout the audience. Malekith looked at Tony with cold eyes, his eyes filled with naked killing intent. Odin doesn't dare to come out, so he'll let you die. In that case, I'll kill you first, and see if he can keep his cool. As soon as he finished speaking, a wave of terror emanated from him, and the dark power gathered in front of him, forming a huge energy ball. With a wave of Malekith's hand, the energy ball instantly shot towards Tony. Seeing this scene, Tony narrowed his eyes, and the faces of the gods showed horror. At that moment, one by one, they fled backwards at a rapid speed. They felt the breath of death from the energy ball. Once the energy ball exploded, they could not resist it at all, so running away became their only choice. In a short moment, the gods behind Tony fled, leaving only Thor standing behind Tony with a nervous face. Everyone else could leave, but he couldn't. After all, Tony came to help him. If he ran away, not to mention what Tony would think, he himself would not be able to get over it. Therefore, although Thor also felt the approach of death, he still suppressed the panic in his heart and stood with Tony. Tony, who was standing in the front, ignored the movement behind him. Seeing the energy ball getting closer and closer, a ball of fire suddenly rose in Tony's hand, and in a blink of an eye, it turned into a fireball the size of a basketball. Compared with the energy ball, the fireball in Tony's hand seemed very small, but as long as you feel the energy contained in it, no one dared to underestimate the fireball in Tony's hand. As the fireball was thrown by Tony, soon, two balls of energy, one large and one small, collided fiercely. Boom. Endless light shone, and the originally dark universe starry sky seemed to have entered the daytime at this moment, making it impossible to open your eyes. The next second, the extremely terrifying energy shock spread from the center of the explosion to all directions. Suddenly, all meteorites and small planets in the billions of miles of galaxies were shattered in an instant as the energy impact passed by. The shock wave rushing towards the spaceship was blocked by Malekith's wave. Tony was too lazy to block the shock wave that rushed towards Asgard. Therefore, Asgard, which was also hit, suddenly shook violently. The earth shook, and cracks stretching for thousands of miles lay on the earth. Countless creatures knelt on the ground with fear on their faces, praying for the gods to bless them. Little did they know that the gods they prayed to vomited blood and flew backwards under the energy impact, and they could not protect themselves, so how could they care about them? Thor, who had been standing behind Tony, escaped by luck. After everything calmed down, he turned his head and looked at the four-sided starry sky and swallowed his saliva involuntarily. The four-sided starry sky looked very clean at this moment. Yes, it was clean. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing except Asgard and the space fleet. According to Thor's memory, there were hundreds of planets of all sizes around here before, but now, they disappeared. And this was all the masterpiece of the two people in front of him. For a moment, Thor had a new understanding of the four words top powerhouse. Yes, you are qualified to be my opponent, if you can block my casual attack. Malekith looked at Tony calmly, and his tone still carried a hint of superiority. Hearing this, Tony smiled. Really? But you disappoint me a little. You are the king of the Dark Elves, and this is it? Tony spread his hands, showing great disdain. Seeing this, Malekith's face darkened a little. Sharp-tongued guy, I will make you regret coming here. After saying that, Malekith raised his hand and grabbed the space on the side. Suddenly, a pitch black longsword was grabbed out of the space. This is the King's Sword of the Dark Elves, and like the Eternal Spear, it is a powerful artifact. Looking at this scene, Tony frowned slightly. The blessing of artifacts on combat effectiveness is still very large. Tony felt a little disadvantaged in the battle with bare hands. Thinking of this, Tony turned his head to look at Asgard behind him and said, "Lend me the Spear of Eternity." After he finished speaking, Thor, who was standing behind him, was confused and thought that Tony was talking to him. But soon, he found that Tony was not looking at him. Sure enough, the next second, a whistling sound came from behind him. Thor looked back and saw that the Spear of Eternity rushed out of Asgard and fell into Tony's hand. He raised his hand and grabbed it, and the Spear of Eternity fell directly into his hand. Feeling the cold feeling coming from the gun, Tony waved it casually, and it was unexpectedly smooth. Suddenly, Tony's mouth curled up with a smile, and the right hand holding the gun raised his hand and pointed, and the tip of the gun was directly aimed at Malekith. "Come and fight," Tony provoked. Hearing this, Malekith snorted coldly, and then his figure flashed and rushed up directly. Suddenly, the Sword of the King and the Spear of Eternity collided fiercely, and Tony and Malekith's figures were also entangled together. Spear and sword beams continued to emanate from the center of the battle. Thor, who was originally watching the battle, was almost beheaded by a sword beam, so he immediately retreated to the back. He realized that it would not make any difference whether he stayed or not, and even if he stayed, he might become a burden. So, it was better to leave the battlefield honestly. With Thor's departure, Tony and the other man were the only ones left in this universe. Their figures were like lightning, crisscrossing the entire starry sky. The sound of metal clashing continued to spread as the two men collided. As for the setting, that sound cannot be transmitted in a vacuum. It was not effective for the two men at all at this moment. In a blink of an eye, Tony and the other man had fought for hundreds of rounds, and Malekith gradually gained the upper hand. Chapter 147, Words Follow the Law. Boom. After another fight, Tony quickly distanced himself from Malekith with the speed of the rabbit spell, and looked at the Eternal Spear in his hand with some depression. The power of the Eternal Spear was indeed not bad, and Tony's strength was not weak either, but the problem was that Tony did not know how to use a gun, so after relying on his momentary enthusiasm to fight Malekith in close combat, Tony soon fell into a passive situation of being beaten. If it were not for his strong strength and fast speed, he might have been seriously injured by now. While Tony was full of depression, Malekith on the other side had a terrible gloomy face. As soon as they fought, he realized that Tony did not know how to use a gun at all. After realizing this, he thought he could quickly defeat Tony, but the result was beyond his expectation. Whether it was speed or strength, Tony was better than him. Although he did not have any skills, he relied on the advantages of speed and strength to fight him to a draw, which was simply a great shame for him. The expressions of the two were different, but at this moment, their moods were not much different. After taking a look at Malekith, who had a gloomy face, Tony suddenly smiled and said, "I've had enough fun. I don't want to play anymore." After saying that, Tony suddenly exerted force and threw the Spear of Eternity directly. Suddenly, the Spear of Eternity turned into a stream of light and rushed towards Malekith. Seeing this, Malekith's pupils shrank, but his reaction was also not slow. He instantly threw the Sword of Kings out to block the Spear of Eternity. Suddenly, the two artifacts opened up the battlefield and collided wildly. Losing the weapon had no effect on Tony at all. With a thought, a terrifying flame suddenly appeared in front of him and gathered into a fire dragon. Under the control of Tony's mind, the fire dragon instantly rushed towards Malekith. Wherever it passed, the universe and the stars were burning. Feeling the astonishing temperature coming towards him, Malekith's face suddenly became solemn. The majestic dark power gushed out directly from his body, and a dark barrier was built in front of him to resist the fire dragon. At this moment, two forces, one black and one red, collided in the starry sky, and neither could do anything to the other. Tony was not surprised to see this scene, and he had never expected that Malekith could be defeated by the fire dragon alone. Therefore, after the fire dragon was blocked, Tony's mental power instantly condensed into a spirit gun and rushed towards Malekith again. The spirit gun was invisible and could not be resisted by ordinary means. Although Malekith's mental power was good, it was still far inferior to Tony's. Therefore, after noticing the attack of the spirit gun, although he also condensed his mental power to block it, he was blasted to pieces by the spirit gun. Puff! A mouthful of black blood spurted out of his mouth, and Malekith's expression changed drastically. Before he could come back to his senses, suddenly, a strong gravitational force acted directly on him. It directly bound his body, and suddenly, the barrier he built with the dark power was broken, and the blocked fire dragon hit him fiercely. Boom. A terrifying explosion sounded, and a sea of fire appeared where Malekith was. His body was surrounded by flames and quickly burned. The intense pain made his face become extremely hideous. It's a long story, but in fact everything happened in an instant. The gods of the divine realm and the dark elves who were watching the battle from a distance were stunned by the changes in the starry sky. They could never have imagined that Malekith, who had just shown great strength, was defeated in an instant. For a moment, everyone's face was full of disbelief. Only Tony, the initiator of all this, was not surprised by this. Although Tony was very strong before, he had never had an accurate standard to judge his combat effectiveness. It was not until he fought with Odin that he had an accurate understanding of his own strength. In terms of strength alone, Odin and Malekith are not weaker than him, and Odin is even a little stronger. But in addition to strength, Tony also has various powerful abilities, such as fire, gravity, mental power, and so on. For ordinary people, being able to use one ability to its peak is already the limit, but because of the system, Tony has reached the peak of all his abilities. Therefore, even though Odin and Malekith are both strong, they are somewhat unable to resist Tony's endless abilities. If I have to describe it in one word, it is invincible at the same level, and can fight against higher levels. Seeing Malekith getting more and more embarrassed under the burning of the flames, at this moment, a group of dark red particles suddenly appeared in front of Malekith. I say, all the harm around me will retreat. Malekith's words sounded slowly. When the voice fell, a shocking scene happened. The sea of fire that originally surrounded him quickly began to dissipate, and disappeared in an instant. At the same time, the declining aura on his body began to become strong again, and the injuries on his body began to recover at a speed visible to the naked eye. In less than a few breaths, Malekith, who was at his peak, appeared in front of everyone again. Seeing this scene, everyone was speechless. The gods in the divine realm, who were watching the battle, were like crazy, and they kept saying how could it be possible. As for the dark elves, after they reacted, they all cheered. Even the relaxed look on Tony's face disappeared, replaced by a solemn look. He knew that the reality gem was awesome, but it seemed to be a bit too awesome. What the hell is this reality gem? It's better to call it a word of law. In one sentence, all his previous efforts were wasted. Tony exhaled a breath of foul air, and forced himself to suppress the shock in his heart. He looked at Malekith with cold eyes and said, I don't believe that you can use this thing infinitely. Let's see how many times you can use it. After speaking, two powerful rays of light suddenly burst out of Tony's eyes and bombarded Malekith. Seeing this, Malekith did not dodge, holding the reality stone in one hand, and said, I say, everyone who attacks me will suffer a backlash. As soon as he finished speaking, the two rays of light that were originally rushing towards Malekith suddenly turned back, and rushed towards Tony himself. Seeing this scene, Tony's mentality collapsed instantly. Fuck. With an angry curse, two rays of light burst out of Tony's eyes again, colliding with the previous rays of light, setting off an explosion. As the explosion dissipated, Tony looked at Malekith gloomily, and said word by word, I don't believe that this thing really has no limit. Then, Tony sank into the void with one hand, and took out a scepter. It was the Mind Scepter inlaid with the Mind Stone. Chapter 148. How do you want to die? Looking at the scepter that appeared in front of Tony, Malekith, who had a solemn face, suddenly fixed his eyes and recognized the mind gem embedded in the scepter at a glance. After all, the 6 gems have almost the same aura except for their different properties, which immediately changed Malekith's expression. As mentioned earlier, although the power of the reality gem is the best among the 6 gems, but compared to other gems, The reality gem must devour the 9 realms before it can fully display all its power. Before that, although the power of the reality gem is still terrifying, it cannot ignore everything. Tony, who had been staring at Malekith, noticed his change in expression almost immediately. Tony sneered at the corner of his mouth and said in a cold voice, "I want to see if the reality gem in your hand can compete with the mind gem." After that, Tony did not hesitate and directly grasped the scepter with one hand and activated the mind gem. Dazzling light emanated from the mind gem. Under the blessing of the mind gem, Tony's mental power suddenly increased without limit. If Tony's mental power was an ocean before, then now, with the blessing of the mind stone, his mental power has completely turned into a galaxy of the universe. Mental storm. Tony said word by word, holding the scepter in his hand. As his voice fell, the extremely huge mental power roared out directly under the blessing of the mind stone, forming a terrifying storm. Unlike the previous invisible to the naked eye, this time, because the mental power was too majestic, it was directly condensed and manifested. For a moment, both the dark elves and the gods of the divine realm could see that a white storm roared directly towards Malekith. And at the moment, when Tony launched the attack, Malekith also chanted again at the same time. But compared with the previous ease, this time, his face was full of solemnity. "I say, all attacks cannot fall on my body, and all those who attack me will be backfired." His voice slowly fell, and suddenly, his originally strong body shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. The divine power in his body was almost drained. At the same time, the mental storm that was originally roaring towards him also slowly stopped under the resistance of an inexplicable force. However, it just stopped. The mental storm did not dissipate, nor did it roll back like the light that Tony had shot before. Seeing this, Tony, who was watching this scene, smiled. He guessed correctly that the reality stone did have a limit. When the limit was reached, the reality stone could no longer change everything. What's more, the mental storm he released was blessed by the mind stone. If the reality stone wanted to change his attack, it had to change the mind stone together. The reality stone, which had not been strengthened, obviously could not do this. In the end, the mental storm slowly dissipated, and it did not fall on Malekith after all. Tony didn't mind this, because he still had some strength left, while Malekith looked haggard and gave people the feeling that he could die at any time. Whoosh! Without any nonsense, Tony directly activated the power of the rabbit spell, and his figure disappeared directly on the spot. When he appeared again, he was already standing in front of Malekith. Tony grabbed the reality stone that Malekith had been holding tightly in his hand. Malekith wanted to resist, but unfortunately, the chanting just now drained all his strength. He was struggling to stand now, let alone resist. Therefore, he could only watch the reality stone fall into Tony's hands. After grabbing the reality stone, Tony did not study it, and directly sent it and the mind scepter into the Shadow Kingdom. After doing all this, Tony looked at Malekith and said with a smile, "How do you want to die?" Hearing this, Malekith glanced at Tony weakly, then slowly closed his eyes and said nothing. Looking at this scene, Tony raised his eyebrows, a little surprised. This guy's more generous than he thought. He can still remain calm in the face of life and death. He is worthy of being the king of the clan. At that moment, Tony, who had originally intended to kill him, had other ideas in his mind and spoke again. "I'll give you a chance to live. Kneel down and surrender, and I'll spare your life. This is your last chance." Hearing this, Malekith, who had originally closed his eyes, opened them again, but he did not do what Tony said. Only a trace of mockery appeared on his face. "I'm the king of the Dark Elves. I would rather die standing than live on my knees. Winners take it all, and I can afford to lose. Let's do it." Hearing this, Tony's admiration on his face became even stronger. Apart from anything else, just the fact that he could afford to lose was worthy of Tony's high regard. Puff! A punch pierced his heart, and flames burned on Tony's fist, quickly igniting Malekith's body. Malekith uttered a muffled groan, without struggling or roaring, and let the flames completely engulf him. Tony, who had already taken a step back, watched this scene quietly, and the admiration on his face had dissipated. He admired it, but he would never let his enemies go. Since Malekith was unwilling to surrender, death was his only destination. With the death of Malekith, all the Dark Elves on the spaceship fell into a daze. Their king was dead, and their faith collapsed. For a moment, all the Dark Elves seemed to have lost their souls. However, they were stunned, but the gods of the gods realm were not. The gods who had watched the battle for half a day, after seeing Tony kill Malekith, were suddenly excited. Then they looked at the Dark Elves with fierce eyes. As the old enemy of the gods realm, no one wanted the Dark Elves to continue to exist. However, they did not rush to take action, but all looked at Tony. Tony conquered them with his strength. Needless to say, everyone was headed by Tony at this moment, so they were waiting for Tony's order. Tony soon realized this, and he would naturally not be merciful, and cold words rang out from his mouth. Kill. Yes. All the gods responded in unison. The next second, the gods of the divine realm, together with many warriors of the Asgard, rushed towards the spaceship at the same time. The sound of fighting rang out again, and the death knell of the Dark Elves also rang. In the previous war, they had already lost many strong men, and now they witnessed the death of Malekith with their own eyes. All the Dark Elves completely lost their morale. Therefore, under the attack of the gods of the divine realm, they did not even have the thought of resisting, and fell into defeat. Soon, a battle turned directly into a massacre. The smell of blood floated throughout the starfield, and the bodies of the Dark Elves floated towards the depths of the universe. Chapter 149, The True Power of the Tiger Talisman. Tony looked at the scene of corpses floating in front of him, and there was no fluctuation in his eyes. As early as the beginning of the journey, he had lost all his compassion and kindness. Except for the people he cared about, the rest, even if they were all exterminated, would hardly leave the slightest ripple in his heart. Not to mention a group of alien life. Ding, mission completed, rewards are being distributed. The belated system reward finally arrived. Listening to the voice in his mind, Tony quickly retracted his attention, and opened the system panel. Temporary mission, the glory of darkness. Mission description, as the ultimate darkness, all darkness should be under the control of the host. Subdue or destroy the Dark Elves, and maintain the glory of darkness. Mission reward, number of draws +1, one of the shadow masks, the Nega mask. Mission status, completed. Looking at the information on the system panel, Tony rarely drew the lottery at the first time, but summoned the Nega mask. In the anime, the shadow mask is one of the sources of power. To summon the shadow army, only by wearing the shadow mask can the shadow army be controlled. However, now even without the shadow mask, he can control the shadow core, so Tony is very curious about the specific function of this mask. As if knowing his doubts, after he took out the shadow mask, the system gave a rare function prompt. Item, Nega mask function. After wearing it, you can summon the ninja core. Collect 10 masks and launch the ultimate darkness to devour the world. Every time a world is devoured, the strength of the shadow core and the mask wearer will be greatly enhanced. Looking at the function displayed by the system, Tony directly ignored the first half. Looking at the information behind, his eyes suddenly flickered. Ultimate darkness, devouring the world. Interesting. Muttering to himself, Tony had a specific understanding of the effect of the Nega mask. However, this thing can only take effect after all the masks are collected. Now, it can only be thrown into the corner, to gather dust for the time being. Putting the mask away, Tony finally turned his attention to the exciting lottery. Every lottery can make his strength soar a lot, so although it is not the first time to draw a lottery, Tony is always full of expectations. But before the draw, he still needs to make a choice, which one to draw, the magic wheel or the spell wheel. Needless to say, the power of the magic energy, combined with the magic energy of the curse blue, directly allows him to rival Odin's level. The spell is also not inferior to the magic energy, and more importantly, the 12 spells are almost complete. Tony is very curious about what will happen when the 12 spells are collected. Therefore, without entanglement for too long, Tony locked the spell wheel. With a thought, the wheel quickly turned, and even with Tony's current strength, it is still difficult to catch the pointer on the wheel. In the end, Tony could only call a halt. Roar. A tiger roar exploded on the wheel, and a black and white tiger appeared on the wheel, then rushed towards Tony quickly and directly sank into his mind. In an instant, a balanced force merged into Tony's body. He seemed to have returned to the mother's body, and his whole body was warm, and surrounded by a warm force. After an unknown amount of time, Tony suddenly opened his eyes again, and a breath leaked out from him. Suddenly, the space in front of him trembled. Not far away, Thor, who had ended the battle early, was about to come forward to greet Tony, but when he saw this scene by chance, he couldn't help but tremble. Terrible. Why does it feel like this guy's strength has increased again? Thinking silently in his mind, Thor did not come up to disturb him, but turned and flew towards the spaceship to find Loki. Tony naturally didn't feel Thor's gaze, and at this moment his heart was completely filled with surprise. The Tiger Talisman represents the power of yin and yang balance. Although Tony also hopes to get the Tiger Talisman, he was a little disappointed when he drew it before. After all, in the anime, the power of the Tiger Talisman is indeed a bit lame, and it only has the ability to balance the various talismans. But after truly integrating the Tiger Talisman, Tony realized that the Tiger Talisman is the most powerful of the 12 talismans, because only it can connect the 12 talismans together to form a whole. For example, the dragon spell and the pig spell, no matter how Tony used them before, he could only use the power of one spell at a time. After using it, he could mobilize the power of another spell. But after fusing with the tiger spell, the tiger spell connected the power in his body into a whole, so he could mobilize the power of multiple spells at the same time. And the power of the tiger spell is not just that. After connecting multiple spells in series, the power of each spell has been greatly enhanced, and even the magic energy has been connected together. This is why Tony was surprised. Although the tiger spell did not directly increase his power, it strengthened his original power, so it caused the terrifying scene just now. Just a wisp of breath leaked, made the space in front of him tremble. Name: Tony Stark. Gender: male. Identity: heir to the Shadow Kingdom. Abilities: horse spell, dragon spell, sheep spell, rabbit spell, pig spell, ox spell, tiger spell. Control of the Shadow Ninja, control of the Shadow Blade, control of the Shadow Knightbot, control of the Shadow Troll, control of the Shadow Warrior, control of the Shadow Alien. Magical aura, cursed blue magical aura. Number of draws: 0. Dark Alliance members: Spider-Man, Winter Soldier, Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, Mr. Fantastic. After taking a look at the data on his personal panel, Tony suppressed the joy in his heart and closed the panel. Then he glanced at the spaceship. He didn't forget Loki's promise. This guy promised to join the Dark Alliance. Now that everything is done, it's his turn to fulfill his promise. At that time, he can also get a lottery. 1 mission, 2 draws. So happy. Thinking excitedly, Tony took a step forward, and suddenly, his figure disappeared directly on the spot, and when he appeared again, he had landed on the spaceship. Its speed has completely surpassed the previous one. Before the fusion of the tiger spell, when Tony used the power of the rabbit spell, although the speed was fast, it still left an afterimage. But now, it was silent, as if teleporting, extremely terrifying. Ignoring the corpses on the spaceship, Tony's mental power instantly radiated out, quickly covering the entire spaceship, and found the traces of Loki and others. However, when he saw the situation of Loki and others, a strange look flashed in Tony's eyes. Because now Loki was being beaten by the gods. Although Thor explained on the side, it seemed to be of little use. Chapter 150: Thor's hatred of his own weakness. In a hole of a spaceship, at this moment, the dark god Hodder, the light god Balder, the Hercules Mani, and the courage god Modi were surrounding Loki. The 4 of them stared at Loki with unfriendly eyes, and Loki also looked at them with indifference. The scene of Loki crossing the battlefield with Algorim before was still vivid in everyone's mind. Now, the Dark Elves were defeated, and Loki, the nominal traitor, was naturally liquidated. In addition to them, Thor was standing between the 2 sides at this moment, isolating them, and constantly explaining that Loki did not betray, and everything before was his plan. However, looking at the situation on the scene, his explanation obviously did not achieve the expected effect. The faces of Hodder and others did not even change much. Soon, after Thor finished speaking, Hodder and others who had been silent for a while finally spoke. Balder looked at Thor calmly, and said slowly, "Thor, we know you want to protect him, but betraying the Protoss is a serious crime. We can't let him go. Don't waste your energy." After the words fell, Thor became anxious. I've already said that everything is my plan. Why don't you believe it? Thor's angry voice sounded, but unfortunately there was no way to change anything. Manny even raised a strange smile at the corner of his mouth and said, who among the gods in the realm of gods doesn't know about your relationship with Loki? Loki regards you as an enemy. How could he cooperate with you? Besides, how do you know that he is not using you? It's just that the dark elves he defected to failed, so this situation has come about. Manny's words make sense. Thor, get out of the way, otherwise, we will have to take you down together. Modi continued, and everyone said one thing after another, and directly distorted the matter completely, turning it into another version. Thor looked at this scene and deeply realized what it meant to be unable to defend himself. Just when he was about to open his mouth to continue explaining, at this moment, Loki's hand was on his shoulder. Loki's voice slowly sounded behind him. Don't waste your energy, they just want to target me. No matter how much you say, it's useless. After these words came out, Thor's body shook, and then he figured out something in an instant, looking at Balder and the others with an incredible look. As his eyes swept over the 4 people one by one, what appeared in front of him were cold faces. At this moment, he suddenly realized that getting rid of the traitors was all just an excuse. Loki had a bad relationship with the gods in the realm of gods, and even most of the gods had hatred for him. Not only from himself, but also from the grievances of the previous generation. Therefore, these people were just deliberately targeting Loki. The so-called betrayal was just an excuse for them to take action. Even if this incident did not happen, if there were other opportunities, they would not let Loki go. Thinking about this, Thor's face suddenly turned pale, and he said in a hoarse voice, "Why? We all belong to the gods, why can't we live in harmony?" After saying this, Hoddle suddenly sneered, "Who belongs to the gods with him? He is a remnant of the giants. How can he be qualified to be among the gods?" If the atmosphere between the two sides was tense before, but there was still room for maneuver, then this sentence completely blocked this little room. Loki's originally cold expression suddenly became cold, and his eyes stared at Hoddle. Hoddle didn't care about this at all, and the same was true for others. From the bottom of their hearts, they didn't regard Loki as a fellow tribe. At this time, Balder also spoke again. "Don't talk nonsense, get rid of him, as soon as possible, so as not to have more trouble at night." "What about Thor?" Modi asked. Looking at Thor, who still didn't retreat, Balder didn't hesitate too much. "Take him down together, just be careful not to hurt his life." "Okay." The others responded, and then a strong momentum emanated from them. The next second, the 4 of them moved at the same time and rushed towards Loki and the other 2. Modi fought Thor alone, and his task was to hold Thor back, and he didn't have to worry about anything else. Hoddle and the other 2 attacked Loki at the same time, wanting to kill Loki here as quickly as possible. At that time, even if Odin asked about it later, they would have a reason to shirk. After all, it was normal for a god to die on the battlefield, and Odin couldn't find out, even if he wanted to. Even if Thor knew the truth, who would embarrass the 4 living gods for a dead god? It must be said that they made a good calculation, but they underestimated Loki's strength. With dual divine duties, Loki's strength is far stronger than that of ordinary gods. What he showed in the god's domain before was not his true strength. Otherwise, when he was on Earth, Thor would not have been beaten by Loki. So when Loki made a full strength attack, Hoddle and the others suddenly realized that they couldn't take Loki down for a while. This discovery made them both shocked and angry, and also strengthened their murderous intentions. Loki was so strong. If he escaped today, how would they resist him in the future? They couldn't just tie themselves together to guard against Loki in the future. Thinking of this, the gods attacked faster and became stronger. Soon, Loki was beaten to the point of vomiting blood. After all, although his strength was not weak, Hoddle and others were not vegetarians either. Each of them was an extremely powerful god, and possessed great power. Especially Hoddle and Balder. One of them was the god of light and the other was the god of darkness. Their priesthoods were originally the top among the gods. Relatively speaking, the power they possessed was also the top among the gods. Therefore, with the cooperation of the 3, Loki was soon seriously injured and lost the power to resist. Thor, who was restrained by Modi, looked at this scene and roared, "Stop!" As he said that, he wanted to rush up, but Modi didn't give him this opportunity. Just when he was about to make a move, Modi stopped him again. But in terms of strength, Modi was naturally no match for him. As long as he was given time, it would only be a matter of time before he could defeat Modi. But what he lacked most now was time. Thor was filled with hatred. Hatred for his own weakness and powerlessness. If he had the strength of Tony or Odin, would the current situation still happen? The result was self-evident. Unfortunately, he didn't, so he could only watch Hodel and the others walk towards Loki step by step. And Loki was about to die in their hands, and he could do nothing. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.